History is not silent. It whispers beneath stone, ash, and forgotten earth. Every scar in the landscape hides a question we haven't finished asking. Tonight, we step into 3 uninterrupted hours of ancient archaeological discoveries that challenge timelines, beliefs, and the limits of what we think we know. From buried cities revealed by chance to artifacts that refuse simple explanations, each find forces us to look closer and doubt comfortably accepted answers. What was built, who built it, and why was it lost? Stay with us as the past opens slowly, deliberately, and refuses to remain buried. At the northern edge of Peru's coastal desert, where dry winds carry sand across a vast and silent plain, the Túcume pyramid clusters rise from the earth with quiet authority. More than 24 massive adobe pyramids spread across the landscape, their weathered forms blending into the surrounding hills, as if shaped not only by human hands, but by time itself. From a distance, they appear almost natural, eroded mesas or ancient dunes, yet their geometry reveals intention, order, and a forgotten logic. Archaeologists identify Túcume as a ceremonial and administrative center built primarily by the Lambayeque culture around the 11th century, later occupied by the Chimu, and eventually absorbed into the Inca world. The pyramids, known locally as huacas, were not tombs in the Egyptian sense, but multifunctional structures, platforms for rituals, residences for elites, and symbols of political power. Constructed from millions of adobe bricks, they were engineered to endure seismic activity and seasonal floods, a testament to sophisticated planning in a harsh environment. Yet the sheer scale of the site raises questions that standard explanations only partially answer. Why build so many monumental structures in such close proximity? Why arrange them around Cerro La Raya, the sacred mountain at the center of the complex? In Andean cosmology, mountains were not inert features of the land. They were living beings, guardians, and intermediaries between worlds. Túcume's layout suggests a deliberate dialogue between architecture and landscape, as if the pyramids were positioned to channel something unseen. Excavations have uncovered evidence of ritual offerings, including ceramics, metalwork, and human remains, bearing signs of ceremonial sacrifice. These findings support the idea that Túcume was a spiritual hub, a place where earthly authority intersected with the divine. Some researchers propose that the site functioned as a pilgrimage center, drawing people from across the region to participate in seasonal ceremonies tied to agriculture, astronomy, and ancestral worship. But not all elements fit neatly into the established narrative. Certain pyramids appear to have been abandoned abruptly, their construction left unfinished. Traces of intense fires suggest deliberate destruction rather than natural decay. Local legends speak of a great catastrophe, a moment when the gods withdrew their favor and the city was symbolically closed. Was this the result of conquest, environmental collapse, internal conflict, or something more complex? More speculative interpretations look beyond social or political causes. Some fringe theories suggest Túcume may have been aligned with celestial events in ways not yet fully understood, its pyramids marking solstices or stellar movements lost to modern memory. Others point to the unusual concentration of monumental architecture and ask whether Túcume served as a regional energy center, a place chosen not just for visibility or power, but for qualities embedded in the land itself. These ideas remain outside mainstream archaeology, yet they persist, fueled by the site's atmosphere and unanswered gaps. Even today, walking among the pyramids evokes a sense of unfinished conversation. The wind moves through broken stairways and collapsed walls, carrying echoes of rituals no longer performed. Despite decades of study, large portions of the site remain unexcavated, sealed beneath layers of sand and silence. Each uncovered chamber answers one question while revealing several more. Túcume does not offer easy conclusions. It stands instead as a reminder that ancient societies were as complex, uncertain, and searching as our own. And as long as its pyramids continue to rise quietly against the Peruvian sky, the deeper purpose of this place, why it was built, transformed, and ultimately left behind, remains an open question, waiting beneath the surface. As the echoes of ancient ritual centers fade into the distance, the journey continues, away from ceremonial landscapes shaped by belief and toward a place defined by tension, control, and the constant expectation of conflict. Here, mystery is not carved into temples or aligned with mountains, but embedded in walls, towers, and calculated lines of defense. In southeastern Spain, overlooking a narrow valley carved by time, the fortified settlement of La Bastida defensive structures emerges as one of the most unsettling anomalies of prehistoric Europe. From afar, La Bastida appears restrained, almost austere. Stone ramparts follow the contours of a steep hill, their geometry precise, their placement deliberate. There is no monumentality meant to impress the heavens, only architecture designed to control access, restrict movement, and dominate the surrounding terrain. Yet, as archaeologists uncovered the full extent of the site, it became clear that this was no ordinary Bronze Age village. The defensive system rivals, and in some aspects surpasses, fortifications thought to belong to civilizations centuries later. Dating to around 2200 BCE, La Bastida is associated with the El Argar culture, a society that emerged rapidly in the Iberian Peninsula and disappeared just as abruptly. Its walls are thick and carefully engineered, reinforced with bastions and narrow entry points that funnel movement into controlled corridors. A massive stone gate, flanked by towers, suggests an understanding of siege tactics rarely attributed to communities of this era. This was not defensive improvisation, it was strategic design. Mainstream archaeology explains La Bastida as a response to social instability. Competition over resources, territorial disputes, and emerging hierarchies may have necessitated unprecedented levels of protection. The El Argar society shows clear signs of stratification, unequal burials, controlled production, and centralized authority. In this view, the walls of La Bastida are the physical manifestation of power, built not only to keep enemies out, but to keep order within. And yet, the sophistication of the defenses continues to provoke deeper questions. Similar fortification principles would not reappear in Europe for nearly 1,000 years. How did a society without iron tools, written language, or known external influence develop such advanced military architecture? There is little evidence of a gradual learning curve. Instead, La Bastida seems to arrive fully formed, as if the knowledge behind it had been compressed into a single moment. Some researchers point to possible contact with Eastern Mediterranean cultures, where fortified cities were more common. Trade routes, maritime exchange, or the movement of specialized builders could explain the sudden appearance of advanced defensive concepts. But material evidence for sustained external influence remains limited. The architecture feels both familiar and out of place, European in location, but unusually modern in execution. This gap has left room for more speculative interpretations. Fringe theories suggest that La Bastida represents a lost chapter in technological development, an experiment in organized warfare that failed and was forgotten. Others propose that the settlement was built in anticipation of a threat that never fully materialized, or one that left no trace in the archaeological record. Who were they defending against, and why does that enemy remain invisible? Equally puzzling is the site's end. La Bastida was not gradually abandoned. Evidence points to a sudden collapse marked by destruction layers and the cessation of occupation. The walls that once promised security offered no lasting protection. Was the settlement overrun, internally dismantled, or intentionally deserted when its social system fractured? The fortifications stand silent on this question, their stones offering strength but no explanation. Walking through the remains today, the experience is disquieting. Narrow passageways still constrain movement. Elevated platforms command clear lines of sight over the valley below. Even in ruin, the design exerts control. It invites an unsettling realization. Whoever built this place understood fear, anticipation, and human behavior with remarkable clarity. La Bastida challenges long-held assumptions about prehistoric Europe as a landscape of simple villages and limited conflict. It suggests that complexity, organization, and strategic thinking may have emerged earlier and vanished more completely than previously believed. The defensive structures do not merely protect a settlement, they guard a set of unanswered questions about knowledge gained and lost. As with so many archaeological mysteries, La Bastida resists final interpretation. Its walls remain, not as a triumph of survival, but as evidence of something briefly achieved and then erased. And as excavations continue, one question lingers in the background, unresolved. What other advanced ideas, quietly tested in the deep past, may still lie buried, waiting to be recognized as impossible to replicate today? As the memory of fortified walls and vanished strategies slowly recedes, the journey moves south, away from stone defenses built to resist attack, and into a landscape where architecture served a different purpose altogether. Here, the past is not announced by towering ramparts, but by silence, shadow, and structures that seem to withdraw rather than impose. Deep within the tropical rainforests of Chiapas, along a sweeping bend of the Usumacinta River, the lesser structures of Yaxchilan lesser structures wait quietly beneath a canopy of ceiba trees and dense vines, half reclaimed by the jungle. The approach itself feels deliberate. There are no roads, only water. For centuries, Yaxchilan could be reached only by river, its stone architecture revealing itself gradually through mist and foliage. The great temples and carved lintels often claim attention, but scattered beyond these monuments are smaller, more enigmatic constructions. Modest platforms, narrow stairways, low-profile buildings tucked into uneven terrain. They lack the visual dominance of palaces, yet their placement suggests careful planning rather than accident. Mainstream archaeology identifies Yaxchilan as a major Maya city-state, flourishing between the 5th and 9th centuries CE. Its rulers recorded dynastic histories, wars, and rituals in finely carved stone. The lesser structures are typically interpreted as residential buildings for elites, administrative spaces, or auxiliary ceremonial platforms supporting the city's political and religious life. Their scale, archaeologists suggest, reflects function rather than insignificance. And yet, these structures raise questions that grow sharper the longer they are studied. Unlike standardized residential compounds seen at other Maya sites, many of Yaxchilan's smaller buildings appear irregular in orientation and layout. Some are positioned at odd angles, aligned neither with major plazas nor with obvious topographical features. Others seem deliberately hidden, accessible only by narrow paths that disappear quickly into vegetation. Why would a highly organized society allow such architectural ambiguity? Excavations reveal that some of these lesser structures were modified repeatedly over time. Walls rebuilt, staircases altered, floors raised and lowered. This suggests long-term use, but not always for the same purpose. Artifacts found within them vary widely, domestic tools in one layer, ritual items in another. The boundaries between everyday life and sacred practice appear blurred, as though these spaces shifted roles depending on circumstance, season, or leadership. One prevailing explanation points to the Maya worldview itself. In Maya cosmology, space was not fixed. It was alive, layered, and responsive. Buildings could serve as thresholds between worlds, not just shelters or stages. From this perspective, the lesser structures may have functioned as transitional zones, places for preparation, isolation, or controlled access to ritual knowledge. Their understated design may have been intentional, concealing importance rather than advertising it. Still, not all elements fit comfortably within known frameworks. Certain structures show signs of use that leave little physical trace. No hearths, no clear domestic debris, no obvious altars. They were built with effort, maintained over generations, yet left archaeologically quiet. What activities took place there that required space, but left so little behind? This ambiguity has invited more speculative interpretations. Some researchers have wondered whether these buildings played a role in sound, shadow, or movement designed to interact with the environment rather than dominate it. The dense jungle alters acoustics dramatically. A whispered voice can carry, while a shout can dissolve into foliage. Could some of these spaces have been used for controlled communication, ritual chanting, or performances meant for select audiences rather than crowds? Others note the proximity of several lesser structures to caves, sinkholes, and low-lying river terraces, features associated in Maya belief with the underworld. While no direct evidence confirms ritual use tied to these natural elements, the pattern is difficult to ignore. Were these buildings markers, guardians, or interfaces with places considered spiritually volatile? The river itself complicates the picture. The Usuma Tinta was not just a transportation route. It was a boundary, a lifeline, and a symbolic force. Some lesser structures align closely with river sightlines, positioned where the water curves or narrows. From certain vantage points, these buildings would have framed specific views: boats approaching, reflections at dusk, mist rising at dawn. Was this coincidence or a form of visual control embedded into the city's design? Like many Maya sites, Yaxchilan experienced a relatively rapid decline. The reasons remain debated: environmental stress, political fragmentation, shifting trade routes. The lesser structures show no single pattern of abandonment. Some were carefully sealed, others left open. A few appear to have been intentionally dismantled. This uneven ending suggests not collapse but transition, decisions made under pressure, guided by priorities we no longer fully understand. Today, these buildings remain among the least visited, even by researchers. The jungle grows thick around them, roots splitting stone, leaves filling stairways. Unlike the famous carved monuments, they do not explain themselves. They offer no dates, no names, no victories etched into their surfaces. Instead, they rely on absence, on what cannot be easily categorized or replicated. In the context of unexplained archaeological mysteries, the lesser structures of Yaxchilan challenge the assumption that significance must be monumental. They suggest that some of the most complex ideas of the ancient world may have been expressed quietly, through spaces designed to be used, altered, and eventually forgotten. And as the forest continues its slow advance, one question lingers without resolution. How many of the Maya's most meaningful spaces were never meant to be obvious, and how many more remain hidden, waiting just beyond the edge of what we think we recognize? As the dense jungle of the Maya lowlands fades into memory, the atmosphere shifts once again, this time toward a landscape shaped not by moisture and shadow, but by wind, stone, and vast open sky. The mystery continues northward, into a high desert where silence carries differently, and where human presence appears carved directly into the earth itself. Along the rugged canyons of northern New Mexico, the stone structures of Bandelier stone structures emerge from volcanic rock, suspended between human ingenuity and the natural forces that surround them. At first glance, the landscape feels almost untouched. Sheer canyon walls rise abruptly, their surfaces pocked with dark openings that resemble natural cavities. But closer inspection reveals intention. These are not random hollows eroded by time alone. They are hand-shaped dwellings, storage chambers, and ceremonial spaces, carved painstakingly into soft volcanic tuff. Below them, On canyon floors and mesas stand the remains of freestanding stone buildings, their walls partially collapsed, but still aligned with quiet precision. Archaeologists identify these structures as the work of the ancestral Pueblo people, who inhabited the region roughly between the 12th and 16th centuries. Bandelier was not a single settlement, but a network of communities connected by trails, ladders, and shared resources. The cliff dwellings offered protection from the elements, while stone masonry villages supported daily life, trade, and ritual. In many ways, the site fits well within what is known of Puebloan architecture across the American Southwest. Yet Bandelier resists simple categorization. The scale and integration of its structures with the canyon walls suggest a level of planning that goes beyond survival alone. Rooms are stacked vertically, accessed by ladders that could be removed. Doorways are small and deliberate, controlling movement and light. Some chambers appear purely functional, others, curiously, do not. Certain spaces show no signs of cooking, storage, or long-term habitation. Why invest effort into carving rooms that seem rarely used? Mainstream explanations point to social organization and environmental adaptation. The soft volcanic rock made excavation easier than quarrying stone, while elevated dwellings offered defense and temperature regulation. Seasonal migration may explain why some rooms were used intermittently. From this perspective, Bandelier reflects efficiency, architecture shaped by landscape, resources, and climate. But there are elements that remain difficult to explain through practicality alone. Petroglyphs carved into rock faces depict abstract symbols, figures, and patterns whose meanings have not been definitively interpreted. Some are positioned in places that are hard to reach, suggesting they were meant to be seen only by a few, or perhaps not seen at all in ordinary circumstances. Were these markers of identity, spiritual maps, or something else entirely? The relationship between the structures and the land itself deepens the mystery. Many dwellings are oriented toward specific views, openings that frame sections of sky, canyon bends, or distant mesas. Light enters certain rooms at precise angles during particular times of day. Whether intentional or coincidental, these alignments hint at an awareness of natural cycles that has yet to be fully understood. Were these homes also instruments? Spaces designed to observe, mark, or respond to environmental rhythms? Speculative interpretations emerge where evidence grows thin. Some researchers have suggested that Bandelier functioned as more than a residential complex, that it may have served as a regional center for ritual knowledge, initiation, or seasonal gathering. The presence of kivas, circular, subterranean ceremonial rooms, supports the idea that spiritual practice was central to life here. Yet not all kivas fit known patterns, and some structures defy easy classification altogether. Others have noted the acoustic properties of the canyon. Sound behaves strangely among the rock walls, carrying whispers across distances while dampening louder noise. Certain carved chambers amplify echoes, while others seem to absorb them. Could these properties have been understood and incorporated into ritual or communication practices? The idea remains speculative, but the physical conditions invite the question. The eventual abandonment of Bandelier adds another layer of uncertainty. By the late 1500s, the site was largely unoccupied. Drought, resource depletion, and social reorganization are often cited as causes. Oral histories from descendant Pueblo communities speak of migration rather than collapse, of people choosing to leave rather than being forced out. Yet the structures themselves tell a more ambiguous story. Some rooms were sealed, others left open. Tools were taken, but not everything. It feels neither sudden nor entirely planned. Standing among the ruins today, the impression is not one of decay, but of pause. The stone still holds warmth from the sun. Handholds carved centuries ago fit modern fingers with unsettling familiarity. Ladders are gone, but the paths remain legible. It is easy to imagine daily life continuing just beyond reach. Voices rising, smoke drifting, rituals unfolding quietly at dawn. What makes Bandelier especially difficult to replicate is not just the labor involved, but the knowledge embedded in its design. The understanding of material, landscape, community, and restraint, of when to build and when to leave space untouched, feels precise, even intentional. It suggests a worldview in which architecture was not meant to dominate nature, but to exist in dialogue with it. As with so many ancient places, Bandelier offers fragments rather than answers. Its stone structures endure, not because they explain themselves, but because they refuse to. And as erosion slowly reshapes the canyon walls once more, the question remains open and unresolved. How much of what was built here was meant to last, and how much was meant to disappear, leaving only enough behind to remind us that we are still missing something essential? As the carved stone of the high desert fades into memory, the journey continues southward, into a different kind of endurance, one shaped by altitude, sun, and resistance. The silence remains, but here it is sharper, carried across open valleys and barren slopes where vegetation clings sparingly to the land. In northwestern Argentina, at the foot of the Calchaquí Mountains, the Quilmes Ruins spread across a hillside with quiet defiance, their stone walls tracing a story of persistence that refuses to fully settle into the past. From a distance, the ruins seem almost inseparable from the terrain. Low stone structures step upward along the slope, following the natural contours of the mountain rather than imposing upon it. There are no towering monuments here, no singular focal point demanding attention. Instead, the site unfolds gradually, a dense network of foundations, terraces, and pathways that once supported a thriving community in one of the most unforgiving environments in the region. Archaeologists identify the site as the largest pre-Hispanic settlement in Argentina, inhabited by the Quilmes people for centuries before the 17th century. The settlement includes hundreds of residential units, communal spaces, storage facilities, and defensive walls, all constructed from locally sourced stone without mortar. This dry stone masonry, fitted with remarkable precision, has endured earthquakes, erosion, and centuries of abandonment. Mainstream explanations describe the Quilmes as a highly organized society adapted to arid mountain life. Terraced agriculture allowed them to cultivate maize and other crops. Strategic placement on the hillside offered visibility and defense. Narrow passageways and elevated positions suggest careful planning in anticipation of conflict. For generations, the Quilmes resisted external control, including prolonged opposition to colonial forces before their eventual defeat and forced displacement. And yet, beyond this historical framework, the site raises deeper questions. The scale of the settlement suggests a population larger than expected for such a harsh environment. Water sources are limited, rainfall scarce. How was long-term sustainability achieved at this altitude over such an extended period? While irrigation channels have been identified, they account for only part of the picture. The margin for survival here was narrow, and yet the community endured. The layout itself invites closer scrutiny. Residential units are densely packed, but not uniform. Some structures appear carefully reinforced, others more transient. Certain elevated areas seem reserved, separated from everyday dwellings without obvious defensive necessity. Were these spaces administrative, ceremonial, or symbolic? The absence of clear markers leaves interpretation open. Artifacts recovered from the site, ceramics, tools, ornaments, reflect both practicality and aesthetic intention. Decorative patterns repeat across objects found in different sectors, suggesting shared identity and communication across the settlement. But unlike other complex societies, there is little evidence of overt monumental or elite architecture. Power, if centralized, left few obvious traces. Was authority deliberately understated, or expressed through means we no longer recognize? The defensive elements of the site deepen the mystery. Walls and watchpoints are positioned with precision, offering wide views of the valley below. This was a community prepared to defend itself, and historical accounts confirm that the Quilmes resisted conquest for decades longer than many neighboring groups. Their knowledge of terrain, movement, and visibility was intimate. Yet even these defenses seem woven into daily life, not separated from it. The line between living space and fortress blurs. More speculative interpretations emerge when considering the settlement's relationship with the surrounding landscape. The Calchaquí Mountains dominate the horizon, their peaks shifting color with the light. Some researchers have suggested that the orientation of terraces and pathways may reflect cosmological beliefs, alignments tied to solar cycles or seasonal markers important for agriculture and ritual. Evidence remains circumstantial, but the consistency of certain orientations invites further investigation. Local oral traditions and later interpretations add another layer. The Quilmes are remembered not only as inhabitants, but as symbols of resistance and continuity. Some stories describe the land itself as a participant in their survival, protective, instructive, and responsive. While such perspectives fall outside conventional archaeology, they echo a recurring theme found at many ancient sites, a worldview in which settlement was not merely practical, but relational. The site's end is as complex as its beginning. After years of resistance, the Quilmes were ultimately defeated and forcibly relocated hundreds of kilometers away. The settlement was abandoned, but not destroyed. Stone walls were left standing. Tools were taken, but structures remained intact. It is as if the departure was final, yet restrained, an ending marked by removal rather than erasure. In the centuries that followed, the ruins stood exposed to the elements, gradually weathering but never disappearing. Unlike sites buried by catastrophe, Quilmes remained visible, a reminder etched into the hillside. Modern reconstruction efforts have stabilized portions of the settlement, but much remains untouched, scattered across the slope in quiet continuity. Walking through the ruins today, the experience is less about grandeur and more about scale through repetition. Wall after wall, foundation after foundation, each one modest on its own, yet overwhelming in totality. The site speaks not of a single moment, but of generations, of lives lived within constraints, decisions made collectively, and knowledge passed forward without written record. What makes the Quilmes Ruins especially difficult to replicate is not a single technique or structure, but the integration of environment, society, and resilience. The settlement represents a long-term negotiation with scarcity, conflict, and identity, one that modern systems often struggle to sustain. It is a reminder that complexity does not always announce itself loudly. As the sun lowers over the Calchaquí Valley and shadows stretch across the stone terraces, the ruins seem to settle back into the mountain. They do not offer clear answers, only presence. And in that presence lies an unresolved question, quietly enduring. How much of what allowed this community to thrive has been lost, not because it failed, but because it worked in ways we no longer know how to see? As the stone terraces of the southern Andes recede into silence, the journey turns once more, this time toward a place where human settlement itself seems to hesitate at the edge of comprehension. The landscape shifts from mountains to a low, ancient plain, where the earth has been shaped, abandoned, and reshaped for thousands of years. Near a perennial spring in the Jordan Valley, rising subtly above its surroundings, the mound known as Tell Sultan, Jericho, holds some of the earliest stone architecture ever discovered, and with it, questions that reach back to the very beginning of organized human life. At first glance, Tel es Sultan appears unassuming, a low tell formed by layers of human occupation compacted over millennia. But beneath this mound lies evidence of a radical shift in how humans understood space, security, and permanence. Dating back more than 10,000 years to the pre-pottery Neolithic period, the site contains massive stone walls and a towering circular structure often described as one of the world's earliest known towers. These constructions predate agriculture as it is traditionally defined, and long precede the rise of cities as we understand them. The early stone wall is particularly striking. Built from uncut stone, several meters thick and once standing several meters high, it encircled part of the settlement with unmistakable intent. Alongside it stood the tower, solid, imposing, and requiring coordinated labor on a scale rarely attributed to communities of this era. Mainstream archaeology suggests practical explanations: flood control to protect against seasonal waters, structural reinforcement for the settlement, or early defensive measures against threats. Yet these explanations, while plausible, leave important gaps. If flood management was the primary goal, why construct such a massive vertical structure at its core? If defense was the purpose, whom were these early communities defending against, at a time when population densities were low and evidence of large-scale conflict is minimal? The labor required implies leadership, planning, and social organization far beyond what was once assumed for hunter-gatherer or proto-agricultural societies. Excavations reveal that the people of Tel es Sultan lived in round houses, clustered closely together, with shared spaces suggesting communal life. Burials beneath floors indicate deep connections to ancestry and place. This was not a temporary camp. It was a settlement anchored by memory and meaning. The wall, then, may have served not only as a physical boundary, but as a symbolic one, marking a separation between inside and outside that was as psychological as it was practical. The tower deepens the mystery further. Rising above the settlement, its internal staircase winds upward in darkness, emerging at a height that would have dominated the surrounding landscape. Some researchers propose that it functioned as a watchtower, others as a ceremonial structure. More recent studies suggest astronomical alignment, with the staircase potentially framing the setting sun during the summer solstice, casting long shadows across the village. If so, the tower may represent one of humanity's earliest attempts to monumentalize time itself. Such interpretations remain debated, but they point toward a crucial realization. These early builders were not merely responding to immediate needs. They were shaping their environment in ways that reflected abstract thought, cycles, boundaries, identity. This challenges older models of human development that place symbolic or monumental architecture much later in history. Speculative theories emerge where evidence grows thin. Some suggest that the wall and tower represent a forgotten social experiment, an early attempt at urbanization that arose suddenly and then stalled. Others propose that Tel es Sultan served as a regional center, drawing dispersed groups together seasonally for ritual, exchange, or collective labor. In this view, the construction itself may have been the point, a means of reinforcing social cohesion through shared effort. There are also questions of continuity and loss. The site was occupied, abandoned, and reoccupied repeatedly over thousands of years. Each layer built upon the last, sometimes preserving earlier structures, sometimes erasing them. Knowledge may have been inherited, adapted, or forgotten entirely. The reasons for abandonment are as unclear as the reasons for initial construction. Climate shifts, resource pressures, or social transformation may all have played a role, but no single explanation fully accounts for the pattern. Standing at Tel es Sultan today, one is struck by the subtlety of its presence. There are no towering ruins visible from afar, no dramatic skyline. The power of the site lies in its depth, in what lies beneath, compressed into earth and stone. It asks the viewer to imagine a time when building in stone was not tradition, but innovation, when permanence itself was a new idea. What makes the early stone walls of Tell Sultan especially difficult to replicate is not merely their age, but the mindset behind them. They represent a leap, technological, social, and conceptual, taken without precedent. Modern societies, with all their tools and records, struggle to agree on why these structures were built. The builders themselves left no written explanation, only stone shaped by intention. As the sun lowers over the Jordan Valley and shadows stretch across the mound, the wall and tower remain silent. They do not declare their purpose. They endure. And in their endurance lies a question that continues to unsettle archaeology's foundations. Were these structures the product of necessity, belief, or something more fundamental, a moment when humanity first decided not just to live on the land, but to define it? As the earliest stone walls of the ancient Near East recede into the background, the narrative drifts westward across open water toward a landscape shaped by wind, isolation, and endurance. Here, mystery rises not from buried layers beneath the soil, but from stone structures that still dominate the horizon. On the island of Minorca, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, the Talaiotic complex of Torre den Galmés unfolds across a limestone plateau, quietly resisting simple explanation. The first impression is one of order without excess. Low stone walls trace the contours of the hilltop, enclosing a settlement that once held hundreds of inhabitants. Circular and oval structures cluster together, built from massive limestone blocks fitted without mortar. At the heart of the site rise the Talaiots, tower-like constructions, solid and imposing, their silhouettes unmistakable against the sky. They do not reach upward dramatically, yet their presence commands attention through mass and balance rather than height. Archaeologists date Torre den Galmés primarily to the Talaiotic period, beginning around the 2nd millennium BCE. It was one of the largest settlements on the island, functioning as a long-term habitation site rather than a temporary outpost. The buildings suggest domestic life, houses with central courtyards, storage areas, and evidence of food preparation. Rainwater collection systems indicate a deep understanding of the island's limited resources, channeling precious water into underground cisterns with careful precision. From a mainstream perspective, the Talaiots themselves are often interpreted as watchtowers or symbols of communal authority. Positioned at elevated points, they offer wide views of the surrounding coastline and interior valleys. In a society without written records, architecture may have served as a statement of presence, visible, enduring, and shared. The construction of these towers would have required collective effort, reinforcing social cohesion through labor as much as through function. Yet questions emerge almost immediately. The Talaiots are solid, with no clear interior spaces suited for regular occupation. Some lack entrances at ground level altogether. If they were watchtowers, how were they accessed, and how often were they used? If they were symbols, what exactly were they meant to represent? And to whom? Unlike later fortifications, they show little evidence of adaptation for sustained defense. The settlement's layout adds further complexity. Houses are oriented in ways that seem deliberate but not uniform. Certain structures face specific directions, catching light at particular times of day. The Tala Sanctuary, a T-shaped stone monument found in many Minorcan sites, appears nearby, suggesting ritual activity closely integrated with daily life. The boundary between domestic, communal, and sacred space feels porous, as though these categories were not as distinct as modern interpretations assume. Artifacts recovered from the site provide glimpses into routine existence: pottery fragments, animal bones, tools. These point to herding, agriculture, and trade with other Mediterranean cultures. And yet, there is little indication of extreme hierarchy. No palaces dominate the settlement. No graves of obvious elites stand apart. Power, if present, seems distributed, or expressed through shared structures rather than individual monuments. This absence of clear stratification has fueled more speculative interpretations. Some researchers suggest that the Talaiots functioned as gathering points rather than towers, places where sound, movement, or ritual performance mattered more than visibility. Others note their acoustics. Voices echo differently near these stone masses, creating zones where sound carries or fades unexpectedly. Could they have played a role in ceremonies centered on speech, rhythm, or collective participation? There are also questions of alignment. While not conclusively proven, some talaiots and associated structures appear to correlate loosely with solar or lunar events. Light and shadow behave predictably across the plateau, marking seasonal shifts that would have been critical for agriculture and navigation. Whether these alignments were intentional or coincidental remains debated, but the consistency across multiple sites on the island suggests more than chance. The Mediterranean context deepens the mystery. Minorca was not isolated. Trade networks connected it to Iberia, Sardinia, and beyond. And yet, the Talaiotic culture developed architectural forms that remain unique. Similar stone towers exist elsewhere, but none follow quite the same logic. This raises the question of knowledge transfer. Were the builders adapting external ideas to local conditions, or preserving an independent tradition whose origins have been lost? The decline of Torre and Galmés is gradual rather than catastrophic. Occupation continued into the Roman period, but the Talaiots themselves were eventually abandoned. No clear moment of collapse is visible in the archaeological record. Instead, the settlement seems to thin out, its structures repurposed or left to weather slowly. Change came quietly, without dramatic destruction. Today, the site feels suspended between clarity and ambiguity. The stone walls still trace pathways. The towers still cast shadows. Yet the silence is complete. Unlike sites marked by sudden ruin, Torre den Galmés suggests continuity interrupted not by disaster, but by transformation, by choices made over generations that redirected life elsewhere. What makes the Talaiotic complex so difficult to replicate is not only the labor involved, but the cultural logic behind it. The builders worked without mortar, without written plans, yet achieved balance and durability that modern engineering still studies with respect. More importantly, they built in a way that leaves intent open, structures that endure physically while withholding explanation. As the Mediterranean light shifts and the sea glints in the distance, Torre den Galmés remains firmly rooted in place. It does not reveal whether it was a village, a ritual landscape, a symbol of unity, or all of these at once. And perhaps that is the point. The question lingers, unresolved and quietly persistent. Were these stones arranged to be understood, or to remind future generations that some meanings are never meant to be fully recovered? As the limestone towers of Minorca fade behind us and the Mediterranean light softens, the journey turns eastward, across mountains, plains, and centuries of human memory, toward the fertile crescent of the Levant. Here, the landscape shifts to rolling plains and seasonal riverbanks, where winter rains transform soil into a patchwork of green, and the horizon stretches uninterrupted for miles. Nestled along the banks of the Balik River, the site of Jerf el Ahmar communal buildings emerges as a remarkable testament to early human ingenuity, offering glimpses of communal life that predate urbanization and monumental architecture as we know it. At first sight, the site seems modest, rows of mud brick structures forming low rectangles on the flattened river terrace. Yet, even in their simplicity, the buildings convey a sense of careful design. Walls rise from compacted earth, thick and deliberate, often punctuated by narrow openings that guide movement within and between structures. Interiors are spacious, sometimes containing multiple rooms, hearths, or platforms, hinting at a purpose beyond basic shelter. The building's arrangement across the terrace suggests intentionality. Pathways, courtyards, and shared spaces interwoven into a layout that invites movement, observation, and participation. Archaeologists date Jerf el Ahmar to the pre-pottery Neolithic period, roughly 9,500 to 8,500 BCE, making it one of the earliest known settlements to experiment with permanent communal architecture. The communal buildings stand apart from individual dwellings, larger, more complex, and seemingly designed for gatherings, feasts, or coordinated activity. Their very scale implies collective labor, social organization, and a shared vision. They were built long before writing, metallurgy, or formal governance, yet they display an awareness of space, resource management, and human interaction that seems astonishing for the time. Mainstream interpretations suggest that these communal structures served ritual or social functions. Perhaps they were centers for food storage, preparation for seasonal gatherings, or spaces for public deliberation. Evidence of repeated use, fire residues, and embedded symbolic objects supports the idea that the buildings played a central role in the social and spiritual life of the community. The design may have been as much about reinforcing social bonds as facilitating practical activity. And yet, the site raises questions that stretch beyond conventional explanation. Some buildings appear unusually robust for structures of this period, with walls strengthened in ways that suggest foresight and durability. Others contain platforms or alcoves whose function remains unclear. Were they seats, stages, altars, or storage spaces? Some rooms were rebuilt multiple times, sometimes in ways that changed circulation or interior proportions. Why would a society invest in continuous alteration of spaces whose purpose was already established? What motivated these early architects to refine communal areas repeatedly, rather than construct new ones elsewhere? The orientation of buildings adds another layer of mystery. Certain structures align with the cardinal directions, while others correspond to subtle variations in sunlight throughout the year. Some platforms capture light at dawn during specific months, illuminating interiors in patterns that might have had symbolic significance. Were these alignments coincidental, or do they reflect a sophisticated understanding of seasonal cycles and solar movement? If intentional, they suggest that these early communities integrated observation of the natural world directly into the design of their shared spaces. Material finds deepen the intrigue. Artifacts discovered in Jerf el Ahmar include small figurines, carved stones, and early forms of symbolic decoration. These objects are often concentrated within communal buildings rather than individual dwellings, implying that collective spaces were also centers of ritual, identity, or storytelling. Could the buildings themselves have served as memory banks, encoding cultural knowledge in their layout, materials, and use patterns? And if so, how much of this intentionality remains invisible to modern eyes? The scale and labor invested in these buildings is striking. Mud brick production alone required the transport of raw materials, shaping of individual bricks, and coordinated construction. Maintaining large communal spaces over decades or centuries implies sustained social cohesion. In a world without formal hierarchies or written law, how was such organization achieved? Were decisions centralized, or did they emerge through collective consensus? The answers remain elusive. Speculative interpretations go further, exploring the social and even metaphysical implications of these early communal spaces. Some researchers have proposed that the buildings were designed to mediate human interaction with the environment, guiding circulation, sound, and observation in ways that reinforced ritual or communal authority. Others suggest that they may have been used for initiation rites, teaching, or other forms of cultural transmission that cannot leave direct archaeological traces. Whatever their purpose, the structures reflect a deliberate relationship between people, space, and society, one that modern humans can admire but struggle to fully reproduce. Equally compelling is the site's abrupt transformation. Jerf El Ahmar was eventually abandoned or significantly reconfigured, leaving behind walls and platforms that were carefully constructed yet suddenly deserted. The reasons remain unclear. Environmental changes, shifts in river patterns, or social evolution may have played a role. Yet unlike sites that collapse violently, here the structures endure, largely intact, offering evidence of deliberate abandonment or careful maintenance even in transition. Walking among the remnants today, the impression is both intimate and overwhelming. The low walls do not dominate the landscape in the way monumental stone towers do, but they create defined space in a subtle, purposeful manner. Sunlight casts shadows across interior platforms, highlighting doorways, alcoves, and thresholds in ways that feel deliberate. Every brick, every alignment, every open courtyard whispers of intention and collective experience. What makes Jerf El Ahmar particularly compelling and extraordinarily difficult to replicate is not merely the technical skill required, but the conceptual sophistication embedded in its design. The builders were experimenting with permanence, social cohesion, and symbolic expression centuries before large-scale urbanism appeared elsewhere. They were creating spaces to contain not just people but ideas, rituals, and relationships, an architectural reflection of human thought itself. As the afternoon light fades across the Balik River terrace and the wind stirs the remnants of mud brick walls, the communal buildings of Jerf El Ahmar remain quietly eloquent. They speak of a society that achieved coordination, intentionality, and architectural foresight at a moment in history when such achievements were thought impossible. And as they endure, questions linger with unyielding persistence. How did these early communities conceive of space in ways that balanced practicality, ritual, and social order? What knowledge guided their hands, and what has been lost to time? In the empty courtyards, among walls that have stood for more than 10,000 years, the mystery persists, inviting us to wonder what lessons, insights, and secrets still lie hidden, waiting to be uncovered. As the mud brick courtyards of Jerf El Ahmar fade behind us, the journey moves eastward once again, across deserts, rivers, and mountain ranges, toward the fertile plains of southwestern Iran. Here, the landscape is broader, flatter, and punctuated by low mounds that rise like silent sentinels from the golden earth. Among these mounds lies Haft Tappeh structures, a site that has long intrigued archaeologists and explorers alike, not only for its scale and age, but for the questions it raises about early urbanization, monumental construction, and the limits of human ingenuity. The first impression of Haft Tappeh is one of subtle, almost deceptive grandeur. From a distance, the mounds appear as soft rolling hills, blending seamlessly into the surrounding plain. Yet closer inspection reveals evidence of deliberate shaping. Layers of clay, mud brick, and stone have been piled, compacted, and arranged in ways that suggest architectural intent rather than natural accumulation. Terraces, walls, and platforms emerge from the slopes, hinting at complex buildings long since eroded by time and exposure. The site does not announce itself with towering monuments. Its presence is insistent, measured, and persistent. Haft Tappeh dates primarily to the early Elamite period, around 2500 to 2000 BCE, though some evidence suggests earlier occupation during the Ubaid horizon. Excavations have revealed temples, administrative buildings, and extensive residential areas, along with burial complexes that hint at social stratification. The architecture relies heavily on mud brick construction, reinforced with stone foundations in key areas, and often arranged with remarkable precision. Some of the larger platforms and walls suggest a level of urban planning that is both functional and symbolic, designed to organize both space and the flow of people. Mainstream interpretations of Haft Tappeh focus on its role as a regional administrative and religious center. The larger structures likely served ceremonial functions, while the more modest buildings accommodated the daily life of artisans, farmers, and officials. Storage areas and evidence of food processing suggest the site coordinated regional production, perhaps collecting tribute from surrounding settlements. The discovery of inscribed tablets, though limited, implies an early use of record-keeping, further emphasizing the complexity of social organization. Yet, as with many ancient sites, the more detailed one looks, the more questions emerge. Some of the platforms are disproportionately large relative to the apparent population, suggesting that their function may have extended beyond the practical. Certain walls appear intentionally reinforced, yet show no signs of battle or prolonged defense. Was the emphasis on durability a response to environmental conditions, or did it reflect a conceptual or symbolic priority, an early demonstration of permanence and authority? The layout of Haft Tappeh itself adds to the enigma. Buildings are oriented along axes that do not always align with cardinal points, the course of rivers, or prevailing winds. Certain complexes seem isolated, connected to the rest of the settlement by narrow paths or elevated terraces. Could these separations indicate ritual significance, hierarchical divisions, or an early form of urban zoning? And if so, how was such spatial organization conceived and maintained without written planning systems or advanced surveying tools as we understand them today? Artifacts recovered from Haft Tappeh further complicate the picture. Cylinder seals, pottery, and figurines provide evidence of both practical life and symbolic expression. Yet some items, small figurines in unusual postures, objects placed in deliberately sealed layers, hint at ceremonial practices whose meaning has been lost. What role did these objects play in daily life or communal ritual? Were they markers of identity, spiritual intermediaries, or mnemonic devices for knowledge and social cohesion? The answers remain tantalizingly out of reach. Even more puzzling is the engineering of some structures. Large mud brick platforms are exceptionally well compacted, capable of supporting weight and resisting erosion over centuries. The alignment and leveling of these constructions suggest measurements and coordination that would challenge even sophisticated labor forces. How did early Elamite architects achieve such precision without standardized tools or widely distributed technical knowledge? Was this mastery learned, inherited, or independently discovered? Speculative interpretations venture further. Some researchers suggest that Haft Tappeh may have functioned as a regional ceremonial hub, attracting participants from surrounding communities, rather than as a purely residential city. Others propose that certain terraces and enclosures could have served observational purposes, perhaps marking solar events, seasonal cycles, or agricultural timing. Light and shadow behave predictably on some platforms, especially at dawn and dusk, hinting at possible intentional design. Could the architecture itself have been used to map time, season, or cosmology? The burial complexes at Haft Tappeh offer yet another layer of mystery. While some graves reflect hierarchical distinctions, larger chambers, richer goods, others are modest, yet positioned in areas of apparent symbolic importance. The relationships between burial placement, architecture, and settlement layout remain difficult to interpret. Did the living and the dead inhabit overlapping conceptual landscapes, or were these arrangements intended to reinforce social memory across generations? Modern eyes struggle to reconstruct the logic behind these choices. Haft Tappeh's longevity and eventual decline add further intrigue. Occupation appears continuous over centuries, yet evidence of systematic destruction or abandonment is minimal. Structures were modified over time, but rarely razed. This suggests a slow evolution rather than catastrophic interruption, yet the reasons for eventual decline remain uncertain. Environmental pressures, social transformation, or external conquest could all have contributed. The mud brick walls stand as silent witnesses, holding memory without words. Today, walking among the terraces and remnants, one is struck by the interplay of scale, precision, and ambiguity. The massive platforms still dominate the landscape, even as erosion softens their edges. Sunlight moves across the site, illuminating walls, doorways, and stairways in a rhythm that feels intentional. The tactile quality of the mud brick, the subtle variations in alignment, and the spacing of buildings all hint at knowledge embedded in the very fabric of the settlement, knowledge that modern builders, armed with tools and technology, would find remarkably difficult to replicate authentically. What makes Haft Tappeh especially compelling and uniquely challenging to modern understanding is this integration of technical skill, social organization, and conceptual foresight. The builders were managing space, labor, and community in ways that balanced practicality, ritual, and authority. They were creating permanence in an environment that demanded adaptability, yet leaving design choices that resonate with symbolic intention. And as we study the site, the questions remain open. How did early societies conceive such large-scale coordination without formal systems of measurement? How much of their knowledge was lost in the sands of time, and how much was intentionally encoded into the very architecture? Standing on the upper terraces, looking across the broad plains of Khuzestan, the silence is profound. The mud brick walls do not speak in words, yet they convey persistence, endurance, and vision. They challenge our assumptions about what early human communities were capable of achieving and leave us with a lingering, unanswerable question. What secrets, buried in the earth and encoded in stone, remain hidden? Secrets that perhaps even today would be impossible to replicate? As the plains of Khuzestan recede behind us, the journey turns once more, this time into dense jungle, mist-shrouded mountains, and the hidden valleys of northern Colombia. Here, the air is thick with humidity, and the forest vibrates with life. Sunlight filters through the canopy in shifting beams, illuminating leaves, vines, and the occasional glint of stone beneath moss and roots. It is in this remote, almost impenetrable landscape that the lower terraces of Ciudad Perdida lower terraces emerge, offering a tantalizing glimpse into a civilization both remarkable and elusive. From a distance, the terraces appear as a series of soft steps carved into the steep mountainsides, almost invisible until approached closely. Unlike the monumental pyramids of more widely known civilizations, these terraces are subtle, low stone retaining walls supporting platforms that rise gently from the earth. They snake along the contours of the terrain, conforming to the natural curves of the landscape rather than imposing geometric rigidity. Moss, lichen, and creeping roots partially obscure the stones, but the precision of their placement remains evident, even after centuries of abandonment and encroachment by the jungle. Archaeologists date Ciudad Perdida, also called Tayuna, to approximately the 9th century CE, as a city established by the Tairona people. The lower terraces, sprawling across the valley floors and lower slopes, are thought to have been foundational elements of urban organization, providing space for housing, agriculture, and communal activity. These terraces are constructed from river stones, meticulously stacked to resist erosion and accommodate water runoff in an environment prone to heavy rains. The engineering speaks of an intimate knowledge of local geology, hydrology, and landscape management, crafted without mortar, yet enduring across centuries. Mainstream explanations frame these terraces as practical adaptations, supporting agriculture on steep slopes, preventing landslides, and creating stable platforms for dwellings and communal spaces. The Tairona were expert farmers, cultivating maize, cotton, and other crops suited to the tropical environment. The terraces allowed them to expand arable land while managing the precarious slope of the Sierra Nevada, maximizing efficiency in a challenging ecosystem. Evidence of irrigation channels and drainage systems reinforces the understanding of these terraces as purposeful infrastructure. Yet, as one examines them more closely, several puzzles arise. Many terraces exhibit uniformity and spatial rhythm that exceed what might be expected solely for agriculture. Some retaining walls rise higher than necessary for cultivation, suggesting additional functional or symbolic intent. Certain platforms align with natural landmarks, river bends, cliff faces, and mountain peaks, raising questions about whether their orientation reflects more than practicality. Were these terraces simply utilitarian, or did they serve a role in guiding movement, ritual, or social organization within the city? The terrace's connectivity adds further intrigue. Stone stairways, often worn smooth by centuries of use, link terraces at varying heights, creating circulation networks that integrate the city seamlessly with its environment. Small enclosures atop certain terraces suggest communal gathering spaces, ceremonial platforms, or administrative points. Yet these spaces are often tucked away, hidden from main sightlines, leaving observers to wonder whether their placement was dictated by strategic, spiritual, or social priorities. Artifacts recovered from the lower terraces offer additional insight but also deepen the mystery. Pottery fragments, stone tools, and small figurines are scattered across platforms, sometimes in concentrated deposits, sometimes isolated. Certain objects appear deliberately buried or deposited within terraces themselves, a practice that may indicate ritual or commemorative activity. The meaning of these patterns remains elusive. Were these deposits everyday refuse, ceremonial offerings, or markers of territorial and social identity? Modern archaeology can document the evidence, but interpretation remains speculative. The lower terraces also invite reflection on scale and labor. Constructing even modest terraces along steep, uneven slopes requires planning, organization, and coordination. Transporting and placing thousands of river stones with precision in a humid, densely forested environment is no small feat. How did the Tairona coordinate such work across multiple generations, especially without the written records or formal tools associated with other monumental civilizations? What systems of knowledge, social cohesion, and transmission allowed for such complex and enduring construction? Speculative perspectives extend further. Some researchers have suggested that terraces may have served dual purposes, practical and symbolic. The patterns of terraces, stairways, and platforms may have encoded cosmological or social information, marking clan territories, ritual circuits, or solar and seasonal alignments. In a landscape as visually dominant as the Sierra Nevada, where peaks, rivers, and valleys themselves hold meaning, could these terraces have functioned as physical extensions of cultural knowledge, architecture designed to encode memory and identity as much as to cultivate crops? The interaction between natural environment and human design is particularly striking. The lower terraces are carefully integrated with watercourses, soil gradients, and sunlight exposure. They seem to anticipate and respond to environmental challenges rather than merely endure them. Modern engineers studying similar slopes note that erosion, landslides, and flooding are persistent challenges even with advanced materials and technology. The Tairona, with stone and earth alone, achieved remarkable resilience. An ability to replicate these structures today with the same efficacy remains improbable. The abandonment of Ciudad Perdida adds another layer of unresolved questions. By the time Spanish colonization intensified in the region, the site had already been largely deserted. The reasons remain uncertain. Environmental change, social upheaval, disease, or external pressure may have contributed. Unlike other lost cities, the terraces themselves were not razed or destroyed. Instead, they were left to be slowly reclaimed by the forest, allowing the stones and platforms to endure while human memory faded. This gives the lower terraces an eerie sense of both permanence and silence, a constructed landscape awaiting rediscovery. Walking among these terraces today, the effect is both immediate and disorienting. Mossed stones rise just above the undergrowth, stairways wind into shadows, and platforms emerge almost imperceptibly from the forest floor. Sunlight shifts across the landscape in patterns that would have influenced movement, perception, and perhaps ritual activity. The jungle vibrates with life, yet the terraces hold a quiet authority, a subtle yet unmistakable imprint of human intention. They are physical reminders of a knowledge system that is both sophisticated and largely lost. What makes the lower terraces of Ciudad Perdida particularly extraordinary and difficult to replicate is not simply their construction, but the combination of ecological adaptation, social organization, and spatial intelligence. They represent generations of coordinated labor, environmental understanding, and cultural knowledge embedded in a terrain that challenges every step of construction. The Tairona left a blueprint of endurance and ingenuity, one that remains partially visible yet largely opaque to modern observers. As mist rises from the valley floor and sunlight filters through the dense canopy, the terraces sit in quiet repose, hinting at lives lived, ceremonies performed, and landscapes mastered. They resist easy explanation, leaving open the tantalizing question that echoes through time. How did a society without written records, metal tools, or centralized authority achieve such a remarkable integration of human design and natural environment? And within the winding platforms and hidden stairways, what other knowledge, purpose, or meaning remains buried, waiting, perhaps forever, to be fully understood? As the mist-shrouded terraces of Ciudad Perdida recede behind us, the journey shifts once again, this time over tropical waters and riverine landscapes, to a place where human ingenuity met the tides of commerce and the rhythm of the sea. Here, in northern Malaysia's ancient coastal plains, the Sungai Batu ancient port structures lies partially hidden beneath layers of mud, mangrove, and thyme, a reminder that some of the earliest maritime networks were far more sophisticated than previously imagined. At first glance, Sungai Batu appears deceptively simple. Low mounds, elongated embankments, and stone foundations rise subtly from flat, swampy terrain. Yet each mound, each stone-lined channel, and each pathway hints at careful planning. The structures stretch along what was once an estuarine system, perfectly positioned to accommodate the ebb and flow of tides, while offering protection from storms and seasonal flooding. The sheer scale of the site is striking. Over 70 structures have been identified, including workshops, storage facilities, and pathways that connect them across the marshy landscape. It is immediately clear that this was not a casual settlement. It was a hub of coordinated activity designed to harness both land and water. Archaeologists date Sungai Batu to as early as 788 BCE, making it one of the oldest known complex port settlements in Southeast Asia. Radiocarbon analysis, combined with the discovery of smelting furnaces and associated artifacts, reveals an industrial economy in operation long before the region's more famous sultanates and kingdoms emerged. Iron production appears central to the site, with evidence suggesting large-scale smelting and export. Mud brick and stone platforms likely served as workspaces, storage areas, and transit points for goods destined for distant markets. The settlement demonstrates an unexpectedly advanced understanding of materials, labor organization, and maritime logistics. Mainstream explanations emphasize practicality. Sungai Batu was a thriving port and industrial center, strategically located to exploit the region's iron resources and facilitate trade with other early Southeast Asian communities. The embankments, channels, and docks ensured resilience against tidal shifts and sedimentation, while workshops and smelting areas maximized production efficiency. From this perspective, the site represents the ingenuity of early trade societies, a testament to human adaptation and organization. Yet there are elements that resist purely utilitarian interpretation. Some stone embankments are overbuilt for mere protection or functional use. Certain channels and foundations suggest careful spatial planning beyond what would be strictly necessary for processing or transport. Could there have been symbolic or social dimensions to these constructions? The alignment of some structures hints at deliberate orientation with the rising sun or with natural landmarks. Were these practical alignments, or did they encode ritual or astronomical knowledge as well? The sheer labor implied by Sungai Batu is remarkable. Moving massive quantities of stone and shaping mud brick platforms in marshy terrain is no small feat, particularly in an era without metal tools beyond what was locally produced. Coordinating workforces, maintaining supply lines for food and water, and synchronizing production and trade schedules would have required sophisticated organization. How was such cohesion achieved in a pre-urban society? Were labor systems centralized, or did coordination emerge through communal governance and informal hierarchy? The answers remain tantalizingly out of reach. Artifacts uncovered at the site further deepen the mystery. Massive iron slags, furnaces, and ceramic fragments indicate a thriving metallurgical industry, yet certain items, ritually placed stones, unusually crafted objects, hint at practices that may not be purely industrial. Could these have served ceremonial functions, marking production milestones, invoking protection, or asserting social cohesion? The evidence is subtle, but deliberate placement suggests intentionality, hinting at cultural dimensions that cannot be reduced to mere commerce. Water management itself is enigmatic. Channels appear to be designed for navigation, drainage, and protection from sediment, but some also seem to guide the flow of water in patterns that could influence temperature, oxidation, or even movement within the site. Was this an early form of engineering that combined environmental control with industrial necessity? Could the builders have understood hydraulic principles in ways that modern observers are only beginning to appreciate? The alignment and shaping of watercourses suggest that this was knowledge embedded in practice, passed down through generations without written record. Speculative interpretations explore the possibility that Sungai Batu was not merely a production site, but also a center of learning, experimentation, or ritual authority. The combination of industry, settlement, and waterways may have allowed for simultaneous management of resources, labor, and symbolic life. Certain embankments and platforms, unusually solid or carefully aligned, may have served as communal gathering points, marketplaces, or observation platforms. Could the architecture itself have been used to encode social memory or guide collective behavior, as seen in other ancient, complex societies? The scale of Sungai Batu also challenges assumptions about the chronology of Southeast Asian development. Its industrial sophistication predates many documented civilizations in the region and raises questions about knowledge transmission, trade networks, and technological innovation. How did this early port manage production and trade at a level that suggests expertise comparable to later, better documented societies? And if such knowledge existed here, why did it vanish or become obscured over the centuries? Walking among the remaining platforms and embankments today, one feels both intimacy and awe. The ground is uneven, often muddy, yet the layout of stone and earth conveys a deliberate rhythm. Movement, labor, and orientation are encoded in the very surface of the terrain. Shadows stretch across low walls and pathways, revealing subtle features that suggest design choices made with intent, precision, and an understanding of the environment that seems almost modern in its sophistication. What makes Sungai Batu especially enigmatic and difficult to replicate is not just the scale of construction or the industrial capabilities, but the integration of multiple complex systems: water, stone, labor, production, and settlement. The builders had to consider hydrology, metallurgy, transport, and human organization simultaneously, creating a living network that thrived in a challenging environment. Even with modern technology, reproducing such an interdependent system at this scale and without written instruction would be extraordinarily difficult. As the sun dips toward the horizon and the estuarine channels glint with fading light, Sungai Batu sits quietly amid mangrove and mud. Its platforms and embankments are enduring evidence of human ingenuity and adaptation, yet they withhold their full story. Who coordinated the labor that shaped this ancient port? How much of their technical and social knowledge has been lost to time? And what other innovations, now buried beneath layers of silt and jungle, remain hidden, secrets of an early civilization whose mastery of land and water still challenges our understanding today? As the tides of Sungai Batu fade into memory, the journey now turns northwest, across continents and centuries, into the highlands of Oaxaca, Mexico, where volcanic ridges and river valleys intersect in dramatic relief. Here, perched atop a gently sloping plateau overlooking the valley of Oaxaca, the remnants of the Yagul ancient observatory rise quietly from the landscape, a testament to human curiosity and a civilization's deep engagement with the heavens. Even now, the site exudes a palpable sense of deliberate observation, as if every stone, stairway, and alignment were designed to bridge earth and sky. From a distance, Yagul appears as a series of terraces, stone platforms, and clusters of low buildings, their angular forms softened by centuries of erosion. The plateau itself provides a commanding vantage over surrounding valleys and riverbeds, a natural stage for both settlement and celestial observation. Walking its surfaces, one immediately senses the precision embedded in its construction. Buildings are arranged along axes that capture the flow of light, shadow, and sight lines across the horizon. Pathways link plazas, terraces, and enclosures in patterns that feel deliberate, yet resist easy interpretation. The site flourished between approximately 500 and 900 CE, primarily under the Zapotec culture, though earlier occupation layers suggest a deeper history of human presence. Yagul is notable for its ceremonial centers, ball courts, and residential compounds, but among its most enigmatic features is the observatory complex, perched atop an elevated terrace. Here, large platforms, strategically positioned walls, and carefully measured sightlines suggest that the Zapotec were observing the sun, moon, and possibly the planets with remarkable intentionality. Certain platforms align with solstices and equinoxes, while others frame distant mountain peaks, suggesting a nuanced understanding of celestial cycles long before telescopes or written ephemerides. Mainstream interpretations position the observatory as a tool for agricultural and ritual purposes. Tracking the sun's path would allow for the planning of planting and harvesting cycles, while lunar observations might inform ceremonial calendars. Yet the level of precision required to construct platforms and sightlines that mark astronomical events raises questions about the knowledge, tools, and methods used. How did these ancient astronomers measure angles and distances with such accuracy? How was observational data recorded, transmitted, and integrated into daily life without formalized written records for astronomical notation? Closer examination of the observatory reveals features that challenge purely practical explanations. Certain walls and viewing platforms seem intentionally reinforced, while others contain alcoves or cavities whose function is unclear. Some terraces are elevated not for visibility of the horizon, but in ways that manipulate perspective and sightlines across other parts of the site. Were these architectural choices purely utilitarian, or did they also serve ritual, symbolic, or social functions? Did the Zapotec encode cosmological knowledge into the very layout of their city, merging observation, ceremony, and authority into a single complex? Artifacts associated with the observatory deepen the mystery. Ceramics, carved stone objects, and ritual paraphernalia have been discovered in patterns suggesting deliberate placement. Some items align with solar or lunar events, hinting at ceremonial marking of time or cosmological belief. Others are positioned within terraces and walls in ways that suggest symbolic or mnemonic purpose. Could these objects have functioned as guides for interpretation, teaching tools for apprentices, or even markers of sacred events now lost to memory? The absence of written records leaves these interpretations tantalizingly speculative. The scale and labor of the observatory's construction are also noteworthy. Moving massive stones, leveling platforms, and achieving precise alignment across uneven terrain would have required meticulous planning, coordination, and sustained effort. How were these tasks organized? Were they overseen by a centralized authority or coordinated through collective knowledge passed across generations? In an era without standardized measurement tools, how did the Zapotec achieve the repeatability and precision evident in the observatory's design? Speculative interpretations extend even further. Some researchers propose that Yagul's observatory was more than a tool for timekeeping. It may have been an interface between human perception and the cosmos. Certain sightlines align with distant geological features that could serve as markers for solstices, lunar cycles, or planetary positions. Could these alignments have functioned as ritual stages, teaching tools, or devices for collective memory? Did the architecture itself embody a cosmology, encoding beliefs about the relationship between humans, land, and sky in tangible form? The relationship between Yagul's observatory and the broader urban complex is equally intriguing. Terraces, ball courts, and residential compounds cluster around the elevated terrace in ways that suggest social integration with observational practices. Observation may not have been an isolated scientific endeavor. It may have structured communal life, ritual, and political authority. Daily activity and ceremonial action could have been synchronized with celestial events, creating a living calendar etched into stone, movement, and spatial orientation. The decline and eventual abandonment of the site adds another layer of enigma. Yagul was occupied for several centuries, yet by the late Classic period, the city appears largely deserted, leaving terraces, platforms, and the observatory itself to the slow reclamation of nature. The precision and durability of construction ensured survival through centuries of erosion, yet the cultural knowledge of the observatory, the methods, the observations, the meaning, was largely lost. Today, the platforms remain, silent and enigmatic, whispering of practices that shaped daily life and cosmic understanding alike. Walking among the terraces and elevated platforms of the observatory, the interplay of light, shadow, and stone is immediate. Sunlight traces angles across walls and platforms, marking patterns that would have guided observation, ceremony, and social coordination. The elevated vantage offers sweeping views of the surrounding valley, yet the design also manipulates perspective, creating sightlines that emphasize distant peaks, horizon markers, and potentially subtle solar alignments. Every wall, every platform, every alignment feels purposeful, yet remains partially opaque to modern eyes. What makes Yagul's ancient observatory especially compelling and challenging to replicate is the integration of social, architectural, and astronomical intelligence. The builders combined careful observation, precise measurement, and architectural skill to create a space that could sustain both practical and symbolic function across generations. Even with modern instruments, replicating the precision, durability, and observational subtlety of Yagul's platforms would be extraordinarily difficult. More importantly, the human knowledge embedded within these stones, knowledge of the skies, the seasons, and social coordination, is largely irrecoverable. As the sun dips behind distant ridges and shadows stretch across the valley of Oaxaca, the observatory remains quietly present. Its platforms and sightlines endure, yet its full story remains hidden. How did the Zapotec measure, predict, and ritualize celestial phenomena without written records? How did these observational practices shape the rhythms of daily life, ceremony, and governance? And most tantalizing of all, what other knowledge, encoded in stone, orientation, and alignment, remains obscured, waiting, perhaps forever, beyond the reach of modern comprehension? As the sun sets behind the mountains of Oaxaca and the observatory of Yagul recedes into memory, the journey takes us across the Mediterranean to the rocky islands of Malta, where limestone cliffs meet the azure sea and the wind carries centuries of untold history. Here, etched into the bedrock of the islands, lies one of the world's most puzzling and enigmatic legacies, the Maltese cart ruts megalithic network. At first glance, they appear deceptively simple, pairs of parallel grooves carved into stone, but a closer look reveals a labyrinthine network whose purpose and method of creation have eluded explanation for generations. The cart ruts snake across cliffs, valleys, and plateaus, sometimes ending abruptly at sheer drops or continuing into the sea. In some locations, two or more parallel sets intersect at sharp angles, forming intricate grids across the island's limestone surfaces. The grooves are remarkably uniform in width, yet their depth varies with the hardness of the rock and the slope of the terrain. The sheer number of ruts, combined with their unpredictable courses, challenges conventional logic. Why carve pathways that lead nowhere, over cliffs, or through impossible terrain? Walking along them today, one feels the presence of human hands exerting effort against stubborn stone, yet the intention behind that labor remains opaque. Archaeologists date portions of the ruts to the Bronze Age, though precise chronology remains uncertain due to the absence of datable organic material. Some researchers suggest they may predate the megalithic temples of Malta, making them part of a mysterious, long-forgotten phase of island life. Others propose that the ruts were contemporary with later monumental activity, including the construction of Hagar Chim, Menajdra, and other megalithic sites, suggesting a functional relationship between transport, ritual, and settlement. What is clear is that they were not casual markings. Carving parallel grooves into solid limestone requires considerable planning, coordination, and persistence, implying that these trackways were significant to those who made them. Mainstream explanations often suggest utilitarian purposes. Some argue the ruts were channels for carts transporting heavy stones, soil, or other materials needed for construction and agriculture. Others point to their potential use in guiding sledges or rolling logs over uneven terrain. Yet each theory encounters obstacles. The abrupt endings, inconsistent depths, and occasional gaps in the network make purely practical interpretations problematic. How would carts descend steep cliffs, traverse rocky outcrops, or cross marshy valleys without mechanical aids? And if the ruts were indeed transport pathways, what drove the builders to carve them with such meticulous care across challenging landscapes? The spatial arrangement of the ruts adds another layer of intrigue. In some areas, parallel tracks run continuously for hundreds of meters, while in others they intersect at precise angles, forming complex networks whose logic is difficult to discern. Certain ruts appear to converge on megalithic temple sites, suggesting a possible ritual or ceremonial dimension. Could the tracks have marked sacred routes, processional paths, or connections between ritual centers? And if so, were they also functional, blending daily utility with symbolic meaning in ways that are subtle, deliberate, and lost to us? Observing the grooves closely, patterns emerge that suggest more than random carving. Some ruts maintain a remarkably uniform width, typically around a meter or slightly more, implying standardized equipment or repeated measurement over time. Others vary according to slope or terrain, indicating a nuanced understanding of geology and effort required to move loads across stone. Could this reflect a sophisticated local engineering knowledge developed through trial and error over generations? And if so, why was it never documented in ways that could be preserved beyond the physical ruts themselves? The ruts' intersections with natural features further complicate interpretation. In several locations, they descend toward cliff edges, then abruptly terminate, leading some researchers to speculate about lost land, now submerged by rising seas or erosion. Could portions of the network once extend farther into the landscape, connecting islands or coastal sites that have since disappeared beneath water? This possibility introduces the tantalizing idea that the ruts were part of a much larger, now partially lost, infrastructural or ritual system. Artifacts recovered in the vicinity are sparse but suggest human activity that complements the ruts' enigmatic presence. Pottery shards, flint tools, and stone implements hint at domestic and industrial life, while the proximity to megalithic temples suggests that movement along these pathways may have been intertwined with ceremonial or religious practice. Yet, there is no definitive evidence linking the tracks to any single function, leaving us to wonder whether they served multiple overlapping purposes: transport, ritual, communication, or even symbolic mapping of the landscape. Speculative interpretations venture into fascinating, if unprovable, territory. Some researchers propose that the ruts were designed as guides for celestial observation, aligning with solstices or lunar cycles when viewed from certain vantage points. Others suggest they may have functioned as part of complex water management or agricultural systems, channeling runoff or marking fertile zones. There are even fringe hypotheses that hint at lost technology or knowledge, methods of transport now impossible to replicate with contemporary tools. What seems certain is that these ruts embody a combination of effort, intention, and knowledge that challenges modern understanding. The effort required to carve the network is remarkable in itself. Limestone is not easily worked, and the consistent parallelism of many grooves suggests repeated measurement or an underlying standard. Without mechanized tools, this would have demanded collective effort, careful planning, and intimate familiarity with the terrain. Modern attempts to replicate the ruts using sledges or carts demonstrate just how labor-intensive the process would have been, reinforcing the notion that the creators possessed knowledge and skill that has not been transmitted to us. Walking among the Maltese cart ruts today, one senses both intimacy and awe. The grooves trace the movement of hands, feet, and tools over rock hardened by time. Sunlight casts shadows across the uneven surfaces, highlighting subtle curves, intersections, and gradients that may have guided ancient users. The landscape seems to hum with quiet persistence, a record of human labor and intention that refuses to reveal its full purpose. What makes the Maltese cart ruts truly mysterious and impossible to replicate with certainty is not only their technical execution, but the network's integration with landscape, settlement, and monumental construction. They reflect knowledge of terrain, load distribution, and spatial planning, yet the underlying principles remain inaccessible. How did these ancient builders determine the exact layout, the necessary depth, and the intended paths across cliffs and plains? Were the ruts designed for practical transport, ceremonial procession, symbolic mapping, or some combination of all three? As the sun dips toward the Mediterranean horizon and the limestone glows faintly in its final light, the cart ruts of Malta endure, silent and enigmatic. Their grooves, their intersections, and their sudden endings speak of human ingenuity, persistence, and purpose. Yet the questions linger. How was this network conceived and executed with such precision? What knowledge guided the hands that carved these stones, and why was it lost to time? And perhaps most haunting of all, what other secrets might these grooves hold? secrets of movement, ritual, or technology that may never be fully understood or replicated in our modern world. As the limestone grooves of Malta recede behind us, tracing paths whose purpose remains elusive, the journey now arcs southward across the equator, climbing the verdant Andes of Ecuador. Here, amidst terraced hillsides and narrow river valleys, the sun strikes stone in a way that illuminates both structure and shadow. It is among these highlands, at over 3,100 meters above sea level, that the lesser-known yet profoundly intriguing constructions of Ingapirca lesser structures emerge. Unlike the imposing main complex that dominates attention, these smaller edifices whisper quietly of human endeavor, social organization, and knowledge that now challenges modern interpretation. From afar, the lesser structures appear as scattered stone foundations, terraces, and platforms that cling to the contours of the mountainside. They are built from carefully cut and fitted stones, though on a smaller scale than the main temple of the sun. Yet, even in their modesty, these constructions reveal precision and intentionality. Retaining walls curve gracefully to follow natural slopes, stairways carve paths between terraces, and low enclosures suggest domestic or ritual spaces. The structures seem to blend seamlessly with the environment, as if conceived not only for utility, but in dialogue with the land itself. Archaeological evidence places these lesser structures within the broader Ingapirca complex, which flourished under the Cañari people and later incorporated Inca influence during the 15th century CE. They may have served as housing, storage, or auxiliary ritual spaces, supporting the activities of the central ceremonial center. Excavations reveal remnants of hearths, ceramic fragments, and stone tools, hinting at domestic life, craft production, or perhaps preparatory ritual work. Unlike the monumental central temple, these structures are subtle in design, yet their careful placement indicates deliberate planning, coordination, and understanding of the terrain. Mainstream interpretations suggest the structures were primarily functional: housing for laborers, storage for food or materials, or smaller ceremonial platforms complementing the larger central complex. Their orientation often follows natural contours, making them efficient for agriculture, water management, and movement across steep slopes. The precision of stone fitting, however, raises questions. Even in smaller constructions, stones are cut and aligned with care, minimizing gaps and resisting erosion, sometimes forming walls that curve and taper in ways that reflect both structural knowledge and aesthetic sensibility. Yet, as with other ancient sites, certain features resist purely practical explanations. Some terraces and platforms appear over-engineered for the needs of ordinary housing or storage. Certain alignments, walls, doorways, and stairways seem to correspond with solar events or distant mountain peaks. Were these purely accidental, or did the builders integrate observation of the sun, moon, or stars into even these secondary structures? Could the lesser structures have been stages for ritual practice, teaching spaces, or observation points, amplifying the social and cosmological role of the main temple? The integration of water management is particularly striking. Small channels, cisterns, and drainage systems are often embedded alongside retaining walls, directing runoff and mitigating erosion on steep slopes. The creators clearly understood the local hydrology, yet the precision and continuity of these minor systems suggest knowledge beyond simple practicality. Were these water channels solely functional, or did they also serve symbolic purposes, guiding movement, shaping ritual experience, or marking seasonal cycles in ways now invisible to modern eyes? Artifacts associated with the lesser structures add additional layers of intrigue. Pottery fragments, stone implements, and small figurines are often discovered in patterns suggesting intentional placement or deposit. Some may mark thresholds, ceremonial boundaries, or memory points within the complex. The subtlety of these deposits suggests that the structures themselves were not merely physical but also conceptual, spaces imbued with meaning that governed human interaction, movement, and possibly knowledge transmission. The scale and labor involved in constructing these minor edifices is remarkable, especially given their placement on rugged, high-altitude terrain. Stones were quarried, shaped, and transported by hand, then arranged to create durable foundations that resist both seismic activity and centuries of weathering. How did these early builders coordinate their work across terraces and slopes, ensuring structural stability and precise alignment without formal surveying tools or mechanized technology? How did they transmit architectural knowledge and construction techniques across generations? Speculative interpretations suggest even deeper significance. Some researchers propose that these lesser structures may have functioned as auxiliary observation points, extending the spatial and ceremonial reach of the main temple. The terraces' elevations and alignments could have framed distant peaks or valleys, creating a network of sightlines used for tracking celestial phenomena, seasonal changes, or social movement across the highlands. Could these minor structures represent an early form of integrated urban planning, where social, spiritual, and environmental knowledge was encoded directly into the architecture? The relationship between the lesser structures and the surrounding landscape reinforces this sense of integration. Every wall, platform, and stairway interacts with slope, sunlight, and the contours of the mountain, creating pathways that guide movement intuitively while preserving the natural rhythm of the land. Even in their understated presence, the structures convey an understanding of balance between human activity and environmental forces, a knowledge that seems sophisticated, deliberate, and difficult to replicate with modern techniques. The abandonment of these structures adds yet another layer of mystery. While the main temple continued to hold significance during the Inca period, the secondary terraces and platforms fell into disuse and gradually became overgrown. The careful craftsmanship and strategic placement, however, ensured that their remnants endure in the landscape. They remain as silent witnesses to human ingenuity and intentionality, offering glimpses of knowledge, labor, and social organization that have no written record and few tangible explanations. Walking among these terraces today, one is struck by their quiet elegance. The stones retain warmth from the sun, shadows stretch across stairways and platforms, and subtle alignments hint at connections both terrestrial and celestial. The physical effort is immediately apparent. Each stone shaped, each wall leveled, each terrace harmonized with the slope and soil. Yet the overarching purpose, the guiding principles that orchestrated such meticulous placement, remains hidden, a puzzle encoded in stone and landscape. What makes the Ingapirca lesser structures particularly compelling and impossible to replicate today is not simply the technical skill, but the integration of multiple domains of knowledge: topography, architecture, ritual, and social coordination. They reflect generations of observation, experimentation, and cumulative wisdom embedded into a living landscape. How did the Cañari and Inca builders conceive such structures with clarity, purpose, and endurance? What knowledge guided the selection of location, alignment, and construction method? And most intriguingly, what secrets, now buried beneath centuries of time and vegetation, remain encoded in these terraces and platforms, secrets that may forever elude modern replication, yet continue to whisper across the highland winds? As the winds of the Andean highlands fade behind us, carrying memories of terraces, stonework, and ancient observation, the journey now turns across vast ocean expanses to a remote cluster of islands in the Pacific. Here, amid turquoise waters, volcanic peaks, and swaying coconut palms, lies a site that resonates with centuries of ritual, navigation, and social memory: the Marae Taputapuatea. From afar, it is modest in scale, a series of stone platforms, open courtyards, and upright monoliths hugging the coastline, yet its significance reaches far beyond its physical footprint, extending across oceans, cultures, and generations. The first impression is one of quiet authority. Marae Taputapuatea rests on flat terrain near the shore, where ocean winds sweep over its carefully arranged stone courtyards and rectangular platforms. Each stone, from low-lying foundations to standing monoliths, has been shaped, placed, and aligned with remarkable precision. Pathways guide movement between platforms, sometimes leading to ceremonial focal points, other times to vantage points where sky and sea converge. Even in its simplicity, the site communicates careful planning, intentional spatial hierarchy, and a keen understanding of both environment and ritual need. Historically, Taputapuatea served as the central marae of eastern Polynesia, a ceremonial hub where chiefs, priests, and navigators gathered. The site dates back several centuries, though oral tradition suggests that its sacred function stretches far further into time, serving as a spiritual anchor for voyagers traversing the vast Pacific. Stone platforms and terraces accommodated communal activities, rituals, and offerings, while upright stones may have acted as markers for sacred boundaries, ceremonial alignments, or mnemonic guides for instruction. The marae was not merely a local center. It formed the heart of a network that connected distant islands, creating a cultural and spiritual map across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Mainstream interpretations emphasize its role as a ceremonial and social center. Taputapuatea facilitated religious rites, hosted gatherings of high-ranking leaders, and served as a repository for ancestral knowledge. Oral histories speak of navigators consulting the site before voyages, performing ritual cleansings, and receiving blessings. Platforms may have housed offerings, altars, or ceremonial artifacts, while open courtyards allowed spectators to witness rites that reinforced social and spiritual hierarchies. Yet the precision of stone placement, the careful orientation of certain alignments, and the integration with coastal and celestial features hint at a sophistication that surpasses purely practical considerations. The alignment of certain structures is particularly compelling. Some platforms and monoliths appear oriented to sunrise or sunset at specific times of the year, possibly marking solstices or equinoxes. Other stones frame distant islands or coastal markers, suggesting an awareness of geography that extends across the sea. Could these alignments have served navigational purposes, guiding voyagers across open water using sightlines anchored at Taputapuatea? Or were they primarily ceremonial, encoding cosmological knowledge and spiritual authority into the very stone? Perhaps, as with other ancient sites, the duality of function, practical and symbolic, was intentional, blending ritual with utility in a way modern observers struggle to fully comprehend. Artifacts and material evidence add subtle but intriguing hints. Stone adzes, carved figurines, and remnants of offerings indicate ritualized activity, yet the purpose of some items remains ambiguous. Certain stone placements and arrangements do not correspond to daily use or functional necessity, suggesting deliberate ceremonial coding. Could these patterns have served as guides for oral instruction, cosmological observation, or intergenerational knowledge transfer? And if so, what principles governed their design, placement, and enduring significance? Even the logistics of construction inspire wonder. Large stone slabs, transported from local quarries or neighboring islets, were shaped and arranged with precision despite the absence of metal tools or wheeled transport. How were these massive stones moved across soft ground, lifted into place, and stabilized with such care? How did communities coordinate labor, plan layouts, and maintain cultural continuity in an environment defined by isolation and oceanic vastness? These questions underscore the skill, knowledge, and social organization required to create and maintain Taputapuatea across generations. Speculative perspectives extend the intrigue further. Some researchers suggest that the site functioned as a hub for knowledge of ocean currents, stars, and celestial navigation, with monoliths, platforms, and pathways serving as mnemonic devices for teaching voyaging techniques. Could the spatial arrangement itself have encoded lessons in astronomy, tides, or seasonal winds? Others propose that Taputapuatea acted as a ritual anchor for a far-reaching network of islands, where ceremonial authority and spiritual knowledge radiated outward, uniting disparate communities through shared sacred practice. In either case, the site embodies a complex interplay of landscape, ritual, and memory that is remarkably difficult to reproduce. The relationship between Marae Taputapuatea and its surrounding environment reinforces its sophistication. The platforms and courtyards are integrated with the coastline. Elevated terraces protect against tidal shifts, and windward orientation channels airflow while framing sightlines across the lagoon and horizon. Stonework and landscaping reflect careful observation of environmental conditions, as well as an understanding of symbolic and ritual space. Even subtle features, such as depressions in platforms or small standing stones, may have held meaning connected to ocean observation, seasonal cycles, or ceremonial choreography. The persistence of Taputapuatea through centuries of social, environmental, and political change adds another layer of mystery. Despite exposure to coastal erosion, tropical storms, and human alteration, the core structures remain intact. Their durability suggests advanced knowledge of stone selection, placement, and engineering. Yet the intangible knowledge, the spiritual, cosmological, and navigational principles that gave meaning to these stones, has largely been lost or transformed through time. Modern reconstruction cannot fully capture the experiential or symbolic significance, leaving an enduring gap between material evidence and cultural understanding. Walking among the platforms today, the presence of past generations is palpable. The air carries the scent of salt and earth, and the sound of waves against the reef underscores the connection between land, sea, and human effort. Pathways, courtyards, and standing stones suggest movement, ritual, and observation designed to engage both body and mind. One can imagine the gathering of priests, the guidance of voyagers, or the ceremonial passage of leaders across the stone surfaces. Yet the logic of arrangement, the full intent of construction, and the transmission of sacred knowledge remain enigmatic, encoded in stone, but largely inaccessible. What makes Marae Taputapuatea particularly compelling and impossible to replicate with certainty today is the integration of technical skill, social organization, ritual, and cosmological awareness into a single cohesive complex. The site required intimate knowledge of stonework, environmental conditions, oceanic geography, and human behavior. It functioned as a spiritual, educational, and navigational nexus for communities scattered across vast distances. How did the builders conceive such an integrated network of meaning and utility without written records? How was knowledge preserved and transmitted across generations? And most intriguingly, what other secrets, encoded in stone, orientation, and ceremonial layout, remain hidden, waiting to be discerned by those patient enough to walk the courtyards, trace the platforms, and follow the lines of sight across the Pacific horizon? As the ceremonial stones of Marae Taputapuatea fade into memory, the journey turns once again to the vast landscapes of northern Mexico, where desert plateaus meet deep canyons and rivers carve their way through arid valleys. Here, in the rugged terrain of Chihuahua, the remains of the Paquimé Ruins emerge, sprawling across terraces of sun-baked earth like the skeleton of a long-forgotten city. From a distance, Paquimé appears as a patchwork of low adobe walls, multi-story compounds, and sunken courtyards, yet up close, its ingenuity and mystery become immediately apparent, revealing a civilization whose knowledge and ambition continue to elude full understanding. Walking among the ruins, one is struck first by the scale and complexity. Paquimé, also known as Casas Grandes, encompasses over 200 structures, including interconnected rooms, towers, ceremonial platforms, and water channels. Adobe walls rise up to 3 stories in some areas. Evidence of advanced construction techniques that enabled stability and resilience in a seismic region. Terraces and platforms cascade down gentle slopes, integrating seamlessly with the natural contours of the land. Sunlight dances across the remnants of walls and corridors, hinting at deliberate orientation, airflow considerations, and spatial hierarchy, all pointing toward a sophisticated knowledge of architecture and environment. Excavations date the primary occupation of Paquimé to between approximately 1200 and 1450 CE, though evidence of earlier settlements suggests that the site was part of a continuum of human activity in the region. Mainstream scholarship highlights its role as a trade and cultural hub, linking the northern deserts with Mesoamerican civilizations to the south and the American Southwest to the north. Artifacts recovered include intricately crafted ceramics, copper bells, shell ornaments, and evidence of maize cultivation, reflecting both local adaptation and long-distance exchange networks. Yet even as these finds clarify aspects of daily life, they deepen the mystery. How could a desert settlement achieve such architectural and social sophistication while remaining isolated from major urban centers? The layout of Paquimé adds to its enigma. Structures are carefully clustered around plazas, suggesting communal spaces for gathering, ritual, or trade. Doorways and corridors often feature T-shaped entrances, whose precise function remains debated. Were these purely symbolic, intended to control movement and delineate sacred from domestic space? Or did they also serve practical purposes, such as regulating airflow, enhancing structural stability, or providing defensive advantage? Some walls include niches, small cavities, or integrated channels that hint at specialized uses, yet their exact purpose continues to provoke questions. Water management is another striking feature. Ingeniously constructed canals and channels once distributed water across terraces, irrigating crops and providing for domestic needs. Some channels are lined with stone, while others follow subtle gradients to control flow. In a region defined by aridity, this demonstrates remarkable hydraulic knowledge. But anomalies persist. Certain channels seem over-engineered for simple irrigation, while others terminate abruptly or intersect in patterns that suggest symbolic or ceremonial function. Were these purely utilitarian, or did they encode cosmological, calendrical, or social knowledge that modern observers cannot fully decipher? The verticality of Paquimé also challenges assumptions about pre-Columbian construction. Multi-story compounds required careful stone and adobe stacking, with internal supports to resist collapse. Stairways, terraces, and openings are precisely integrated, suggesting not only structural understanding but also awareness of human movement, sight lines, and communal flow. The labor required, particularly in an arid and rugged environment, implies an organized workforce capable of coordinated effort over decades or even centuries. How such knowledge and labor were mobilized, transmitted, and sustained in a society without written records remains a profound question. Speculative interpretations extend the mystery further. Some researchers propose that Paquimé was more than a trading and ceremonial center. It may have functioned as a hub of knowledge, integrating astronomy, agriculture, and ritual practice into daily life. Certain alignments of walls and plazas correspond to solstices or cardinal directions, suggesting intentional engagement with celestial cycles. Could the T-shaped doorways, niches, and water channels have also encoded symbolic meaning, guiding ritual, social interaction, or teaching practices? If so, Paquimé represents a level of integration between built environment, social organization, and knowledge that is extremely difficult to replicate today. Artifacts recovered at Paquimé deepen this intrigue. Copper bells and jewelry indicate long-distance trade and metallurgical skill. Elaborate ceramics reveal aesthetic sophistication and possible symbolic messaging, and maize storage facilities suggest careful management of agricultural surplus. Yet some finds resist straightforward explanation. Small ritual figurines, unusual stone arrangements, and deposits of exotic shells appear deliberately placed in ways that hint at ceremonial or cosmological intent. How much knowledge, agricultural, architectural, spiritual, was encoded in these objects, and how much of it has been lost to time? The abrupt decline and abandonment of Paquimé adds another layer of mystery. By the mid-15th century, the site was largely deserted, leaving adobe walls, terraces, and water channels to the forces of erosion and desert winds. Unlike more monumental cities of Mesoamerica, there is little evidence of violent destruction, suggesting that the reasons for abandonment were complex and possibly environmental, social, or economic in nature. What knowledge vanished with the people who left? And how much of Paquimé's sophistication, its urban planning, water management, and ceremonial integration, remains partially invisible to modern archaeology? Walking among the terraces, plazas, and multi-story compounds today, the visitor senses the deliberate choices embedded in every stone. Sunlight illuminates corridors, casting long shadows across stairways and open courtyards, revealing alignments that hint at solar, wind, or observational consideration. The adobe walls, though weathered, still convey careful craftsmanship, from mud mixing to stone fitting, illustrating a mastery of materials and environment. Yet the full logic behind the construction, the social, symbolic, and technical principles that orchestrated such a complex settlement, remains elusive, leaving Paquimé as both an artifact and a riddle. What makes the Paquimé Ruins especially compelling, and nearly impossible to replicate, is the integration of multiple domains of knowledge: environmental adaptation, architectural precision, social organization, trade, ritual, and possibly astronomical observation. The builders combined technical skill, cultural insight, and organizational capacity to create a site that functioned across practical, symbolic, and ceremonial dimensions. How did they conceive such complex systems without formal records or advanced tools? How was knowledge preserved, transmitted, and encoded in stone, adobe, and water? And most intriguingly, what other secrets, hidden in terrace alignments, wall niches, or ceremonial plazas, remain beyond our grasp, whispering the achievements of a civilization that continues to challenge our understanding of human ingenuity? As the sun sets over the desert canyons of Chihuahua, leaving the Paquimé Ruins bathed in a warm ochre glow, our journey now shifts across the vast expanse of Asia to the rolling plains and rugged hills of northern China. Here, in Shanxi province, lies a site whose scale and sophistication defy easy explanation: the Shimao stone-walled city. From a distance, Shimao appears as a massive, almost geometric network of stone walls, terraces, and enclosures rising from the landscape like a city etched into the earth itself. Yet closer inspection reveals a complexity that has left archaeologists and historians grappling with questions of construction, purpose, and human capability. The city spreads across more than 4 square kilometers, encircled by monumental stone walls up to 16 meters high in places, made from carefully stacked limestone blocks. Within these fortifications lie tiered platforms, watchtowers, and multiple concentric enclosures, each meticulously aligned and integrated with the surrounding topography. Pathways weave through residential and ceremonial areas, stairways ascend terraced hills, and open plazas punctuate the complex with rhythm and symmetry. Even in decay, the deliberate order, scale, and precision of construction are immediately apparent, reflecting an extraordinary understanding of materials, engineering, and landscape. Shimao dates back approximately 4,000 to 4,500 years, placing it firmly in the late Neolithic period. Excavations have uncovered not only domestic structures, but also elaborate palatial platforms, ritual spaces, and remnants of walls containing jade, pottery, and stone artifacts. Such finds suggest a society capable of sustained urban planning, social stratification, and long-distance trade. Yet the presence of massive stone fortifications, without evidence of comparable military threats nearby, raises questions. Were these walls defensive, symbolic, or both? Did they reflect actual social tensions, or were they intended to impress, intimidate, or codify ceremonial boundaries? Walking through the ruins, one notices the extraordinary precision of stone cutting and alignment. Walls taper slightly as they ascend, corners are squared with care, and terraces follow the natural slope of the hills while maintaining level surfaces. No mortar binds the stones, yet the structures have endured millennia of weathering and seismic activity. How did Neolithic builders achieve such durability and precision without metal tools or standardized measurement systems? How did they move and place massive limestone blocks across uneven terrain, especially considering the scale of some of the walls, which extend hundreds of meters uninterrupted? The layout itself suggests advanced urban planning. Concentric walls and terraces create zones that may have served distinct social, administrative, or ceremonial functions. Elevated platforms are positioned to dominate the landscape, providing sight lines across the entire settlement. Some archaeologists speculate that certain platforms may have functioned as observation points for tracking celestial events, water flow, or social activity. Others suggest that the terraces and walls reflect complex social hierarchies, reinforcing power structures through spatial organization. Yet the exact interplay of function, symbolism, and ritual remains elusive, hidden in layers of stone and earth. Artifacts recovered at Shimao offer tantalizing clues, but also deepen the mystery. Jade carvings, exotic pottery, and ritual paraphernalia indicate trade connections and ceremonial practice, yet certain objects appear deliberately placed within walls, platforms, or courtyards. Were these deposits intended to mark sacred space, guide social behavior, or encode knowledge? Could the city itself have functioned as a mnemonic device, where movement through streets, terraces, and enclosures conveyed lessons about authority, cosmology, or natural cycles? Such possibilities hint at a depth of cultural sophistication that is extraordinarily difficult to reconstruct or replicate today. Water management at Shimao is equally intriguing. Terraces and channels suggest an understanding of runoff, drainage, and erosion control, ensuring stability for massive walls and residential compounds. Certain channels seem unusually precise, with subtle gradients that guide water across steep terrain. Could these features have been purely functional, or did they also play a symbolic or ritual role, marking boundaries or aligning with celestial or topographical markers? The integration of hydrology with urban layout demonstrates not only practical knowledge, but also an ability to harmonize human activity with natural forces. The scale of labor required to construct Shimao is staggering. Tens of thousands of people, working over generations, would have been necessary to quarry, transport, shape, and assemble stone blocks, organize terraces, and maintain fortifications. What social structures, planning methods, and technical knowledge made this possible? How were knowledge, skill, and coordination transmitted without writing or formalized measurement systems? The answers remain tantalizingly out of reach, leaving modern observers to marvel at the ingenuity, persistence, and organization encoded in each stone. Speculative interpretations extend the mystery even further. Some researchers suggest that Shimao was not merely a city, but a ceremonial and cosmological center, where architecture, observation, and ritual were integrated into a single system. The placement of walls, terraces, and enclosures may have encoded astronomical knowledge, social hierarchies, or spiritual beliefs. Could movement through the city have mirrored cosmological journeys, or did ceremonial practices guide the organization of labor and social interaction? And if so, how much knowledge of cosmology, power, and environment was embedded into the very stonework? The abandonment of Shimao, around 3,800 years ago, adds to its enigma. Despite its scale, fortifications, and advanced construction, the site was eventually deserted. The reasons remain speculative. Environmental change, social upheaval, or resource depletion may have played roles, yet the sophistication of the structures and the precision with which they were built endure as a silent testament to human capability. The city's memory survives only through its stones, leaving gaps that cannot be filled by excavation alone. Walking through Shimao today, the visitor senses both awe and incompleteness. Sunlight traces walls, terraces, and stairways, revealing the scale, precision, and deliberate patterning of each structure. Every platform, corner, and alignment hints at knowledge of engineering, landscape, and possibly cosmology. Yet the deeper logic, the principles, techniques, and societal understanding that produced such a city, remains obscured. What makes the Shimao stone-walled city so compelling and impossible to replicate is not merely the monumental scale or technical skill, but the integration of multiple forms of knowledge: architecture, urban planning, resource management, ritual practice, and possibly astronomical observation. How did Neolithic builders conceive, plan, and execute such a complex city without written records or mechanized tools? How was knowledge preserved, transmitted, and maintained across generations? And perhaps most hauntingly, what secrets, encoded in stone, alignment, and spatial hierarchy, remain hidden, beyond replication and beyond our understanding, waiting silently on the northern plains of China? As the monumental stone walls of Shimao recede behind us, echoing the ingenuity of Neolithic architects and the mysteries of human urbanization, our journey now winds across thousands of kilometers to the rugged and mist-shrouded peaks of the Caucasus Mountains. Here, amid steep valleys, wind-swept plateaus, and limestone outcrops, lie the enigmatic torpedo-shaped dolmens, structures whose unusual form and unexplained purpose have captivated researchers for centuries. Unlike sprawling cities or ceremonial complexes, these dolmens are compact yet striking. Elongated, torpedo-like stone chambers capped with massive slabs, seemingly defying the limitations of human labor and engineering of their era. At first glance, the dolmens appear deceptively simple. Low stone walls forming narrow, elongated chambers, sealed by single or multiple capstones. Yet closer inspection reveals extraordinary craftsmanship. The stones are carefully selected, shaped, and fitted to create watertight enclosures that have endured millennia of seismic activity, weathering, and shifting soils. Their characteristic torpedo shape, a smooth, tapering form that narrows toward one end, distinguishes them from other dolmenic structures around the world. Some are positioned atop ridges or terraces, aligned along precise axes, while others cluster in groups, suggesting deliberate planning rather than random placement. Archaeological dating places many of these dolmens between roughly 4,000 and 3,000 BCE, situating them within the late Neolithic to early Bronze Age period. The sites are scattered across the Caucasus, from the northern slopes of the Greater Caucasus to the foothills of the Lesser Caucasus, and yet they share remarkable uniformity in design and proportion. Such consistency across a vast and often inaccessible terrain raises compelling questions. How was this architectural knowledge transmitted across generations and distances? Did these communities share a common cultural or spiritual framework that guided construction, or were these design principles independently developed yet strikingly similar? Mainstream interpretations categorize the dolmens as burial sites or ceremonial structures, a theory supported by the occasional discovery of human remains, pottery fragments, and stone tools within or nearby. Yet the interior spaces of many dolmens are surprisingly small, often barely accommodating a single body or a limited set of offerings. Why then were some chambers built to lengths exceeding 4 or 5 meters? Could the elongated shape serve symbolic purposes, perhaps guiding the soul along a defined path or representing a connection between terrestrial and cosmic realms? And why do so many dolmens share the same torpedo profile, as if some standard of sacred proportion dictated their form? The placement of the dolmens further deepens the mystery. Many occupy elevated ridges or terraces that command sweeping views of valleys and passes below. Such locations would have required significant labor to transport and lift heavy stones, yet they offer minimal protection from the elements or direct strategic advantage. Was the effort devoted purely to visibility, ritual prominence, or celestial alignment? Some researchers note that the long axes of certain dolmens align with solstitial sunrises, distant mountain peaks, or prominent rivers. Could these structures have functioned as terrestrial markers, celestial observatories, or ritual waypoints embedded within the landscape itself? Construction techniques add another layer of intrigue. The stones used in the dolmens are massive, often weighing several tons, yet they were quarried, transported, and positioned without evidence of metal tools or advanced machinery. In some cases, dolmens feature intricate internal jointing, suggesting that builders understood load distribution and structural stability far beyond what might be expected of small, dispersed communities. How did prehistoric builders conceptualize, measure, and execute these designs with such precision? And how much knowledge of leverage, geometry, and material properties has been lost to time, leaving only the silent stone as evidence? Artifacts found in and around the dolmens are tantalizing yet inconclusive. Pottery shards, stone axes, and occasional metal objects suggest human activity and ceremonial deposition, yet patterns of placement remain obscure. Certain dolmens contain carefully arranged stones or small depressions whose purpose cannot be determined. Were these intended to hold offerings, mark ritual boundaries, or encode symbolic meaning known only to those who built them? The interplay of functional, ceremonial, and symbolic design appears deliberate, but remains largely undeciphered. Some speculative interpretations venture even further. Scholars have proposed that the torpedo shape may serve to channel spiritual energy, guide movement, or represent a cosmological principle. Others suggest the structures could have been used as acoustic chambers, amplifying chants, drumming, or other ritual sounds during ceremonies. Could the alignment, shape, and placement of these dolmens encode a sophisticated understanding of sound, light, and landscape interaction, knowledge impossible to replicate without first-hand cultural context? These ideas remain unproven, yet they underscore the depth of intelligence, intention, and experiential knowledge embedded in the stones. The concentration of dolmens in certain valleys suggests a level of social organization that is difficult to imagine. Communities would have needed to coordinate quarrying, transportation, and precise assembly of stones, sometimes across steep terrain. How was labor mobilized, and what social or spiritual incentives motivated such enormous effort? Did construction require a hierarchy of expertise, involving planners, builders, and ritual specialists working in concert? And how was such knowledge maintained across generations without written records? Visiting the dolmens today, one senses both intimacy and grandeur. Each torpedo-shaped chamber rises from the earth like a carved vessel, narrow ends pointing toward hills, rivers, or skies. Sunlight catches on the capstones, casting long, tapering shadows that echo the form of the structure itself. Walking among them, it is easy to imagine the ceremonies, burials, or observations that might once have taken place. Yet the original intent, the combination of cultural, spiritual, and technical knowledge, remains out of reach. What makes the torpedo-shaped dolmens of the Caucasus so compelling and impossible to replicate is the integration of physical labor, architectural precision, social coordination, and symbolic or ritual knowledge into structures that endure millennia. How did communities conceive a standardized form across a rugged, dispersed landscape? How was the knowledge of shape, alignment, and construction transmitted with consistency and accuracy? And most hauntingly, what secrets, encoded in stone, form, and placement, remain invisible to us, lost to time but still resonating across the valleys and peaks of the Caucasus, inviting wonder, study, and perhaps an understanding that may never be fully realized? As the torpedo-shaped dolmens of the Caucasus recede behind us, silent sentinels atop rugged valleys, the journey turns once more across continents to the windswept plains and alpine ridges of the northern United States. Here, at an elevation of nearly 3,000 meters in the Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming, lies a structure whose form and purpose continue to confound researchers: the Bighorn Medicine Wheel. From afar, it appears deceptively simple, a series of stones radiating from a central hub. But closer inspection reveals a pattern of such precision and intent that it seems to bridge the realms of astronomy, ritual, and human ingenuity in ways that are almost impossible to replicate today. The medicine wheel spans approximately 27 meters in diameter, composed of a central cairn surrounded by 28 spokes extending to an outer ring of stones. Each stone was carefully selected and positioned, with attention not merely to placement but also to sightlines and orientation. The surrounding highlands accentuate the wheel's presence, with distant peaks and valleys framing its silhouette against the sky. Standing beside it, one can feel the deliberate interaction between human construction and landscape, a fusion of labor, observation, and symbolism that echoes across millennia. Archaeologists date the wheel to between 1,200 and 3,000 years ago, situating it within the late prehistoric era of North America. Its creators remain unknown, as no written records accompany the structure, leaving only the stone itself to speak. Mainstream interpretations suggest a ceremonial or ritual function, potentially linked to medicine, spirituality, or social gathering. Indigenous oral histories reference sacred wheels and circles, aligning with seasonal cycles or spiritual journeys. Yet the design itself, its radial symmetry, precise alignment, and proportional relationships, suggests a deeper level of understanding, one that encompasses both observation of the cosmos and knowledge of the local terrain. The astronomical potential of the Bighorn Medicine Wheel is particularly compelling. Researchers have noted alignments with solar events such as summer and winter solstices, as well as lunar phenomena and certain prominent stars or constellations. Could the wheel have functioned as an observatory, guiding seasonal movement, ceremonial timing, or agricultural practice? Some spokes and cairns appear to mark specific solar rises or mountain peaks, implying an intentional fusion of astronomy with ritual. Yet, if such alignments were indeed deliberate, how did the builders calculate them with such accuracy, in an era without advanced instruments? Equally enigmatic is the selection and arrangement of stones. The outer ring consists of roughly 28 stones, spaced unevenly yet with apparent purpose. Some stones are small and unassuming, others large and imposing, yet all conform to the circular geometry of the wheel. How were these stones chosen, transported, and positioned across uneven alpine terrain? The effort required to quarry, carry, and place them precisely in alignment suggests coordination, knowledge of geometry, and labor-intensive planning, achievements remarkable for prehistoric communities working without mechanized tools. Beyond astronomy and placement, the medicine wheel may have functioned as a social or spiritual anchor. The central cairn could have served as a focal point for ritual activity, while the spokes guide movement and define sacred space. Could each spoke represent a path, a cosmological principle, or a directional guide for ceremonial observance? Some researchers speculate that the wheel might encode a system of knowledge, allowing individuals to track celestial events, ritual timing, or social hierarchies, an experiential map of the universe embedded in stone. Artifacts associated with the site are sparse but suggest human engagement. Small stone tools, fragments of pottery, and occasional ceremonial items indicate occupation and repeated visitation, though not permanent settlement. This scarcity of material evidence contrasts sharply with the labor invested in the wheel itself, highlighting a profound cultural investment in form, symbolism, and enduring presence. Was the wheel constructed primarily as a communal gathering point, a ritual marker, or an astronomical guide? Or did it serve multiple functions simultaneously, its full meaning comprehensible only to those trained in observation and ritual practice? The context of its location enhances the mystery. The wheel is sited atop a mountain ridge with panoramic views of surrounding peaks, valleys, and rivers. Such placement would have required significant effort to transport stones uphill while contending with exposure, wind, and steep terrain. Why choose this particular location? Was elevation necessary for observation, for ritual prominence, or as a statement of authority over the surrounding land? And how did the builders conceive of a structure that integrated landscape, stone, and sky in such a harmonious and enduring way? Speculative interpretations push further. Some researchers propose that the medicine wheel functioned as a tool for encoding cosmological knowledge, mapping the cycles of sun, moon, and stars across the seasons. Others suggest acoustic or ritual functions, with movement along spokes and pathways designed to amplify ceremony or guide processions. Perhaps the wheel was a spatial mnemonic, teaching observational skills, spiritual principles, or social order through interaction with the structure itself. If so, the knowledge embedded in the wheel transcends its physical stones, residing instead in action, alignment, and perception, elements almost impossible to replicate without understanding the original context. Walking among the spokes today, the wheel evokes both clarity and ambiguity. Sunlight glances off each stone, tracing radial shadows that shift with the seasons, hinting at the intentionality of orientation. Wind sweeps across the high plateau, carrying with it echoes of voices, ceremonies, and footsteps long vanished. The geometry and placement speak of human cognition, precision, and foresight. Yet the full meaning, the combination of ritual, observation, and social significance, remains tantalizingly inaccessible. What makes the Bighorn medicine wheel so extraordinary and impossible to replicate is not merely its construction or scale, but the integration of multiple domains of knowledge: astronomy, landscape understanding, ritual practice, and communal organization. How did the builders conceive a radial geometry so precise in alignment with celestial and topographical features? How was such knowledge maintained and transmitted across generations without written language or formal measurement systems? And most intriguingly, what other secrets, hidden in the radial spokes, cairns, and alignments, remain encoded in stone, waiting silently on the mountain ridge for discovery, interpretation, and wonder? As the winds sweep across the high plains of Wyoming and the Bighorn medicine wheel slowly fades into memory, the journey of stone, ritual, and human ingenuity now leads us far to the east, toward the rugged landscapes of the South Caucasus. Nestled among rocky outcrops and rolling semi-deserts of Azerbaijan, the Gobustan Rock Art awaits. A remarkable open-air gallery etched into stone over tens of thousands of years, offering an intimate yet mystifying glimpse into the minds of those who lived here long before recorded history. At first glance, Gobustan is a landscape of jagged rock formations, undulating hills, and scattered boulders, weathered smooth by wind and rain. Across these surfaces, faint lines, deep grooves, and intricately carved images form an enduring tapestry of human expression. Animals stride across stone, Humans hunt and dance, boats glide through carved waters, and symbols of unknown meaning punctuate the scenes, all rendered in shallow bas-relief, yet resonating with striking clarity. The immediacy of these carvings, set against the stark and exposed terrain, creates a sensation of timeless observation, the distant past made tangible in stone. Archaeologists date much of the Gobustan Rock Art to between 5,000 and 40,000 years ago, with overlapping layers revealing continuous engagement with the landscape over millennia. The diversity of styles, subjects, and techniques suggests that generations of artists, observers, and storytellers returned to these rocks to leave traces of their lives, beliefs, and knowledge. Mainstream interpretations identify the images as depictions of hunting scenes, ritual gatherings, and symbolic motifs, offering insights into subsistence practices, social structures, and spiritual life. Yet the density, repetition, and complexity of motifs raise deeper questions. Why were these images placed here, and what principles guided their selection, composition, and alignment? Walking among the petroglyphs, one notices subtle patterns that hint at an awareness of spatial relationships and possibly cosmological observation. Certain carvings appear oriented to the rising or setting sun at solstices or equinoxes, while others frame distant hills, water sources, or horizon lines. Could the positioning of these carvings encode information about seasonal cycles, migratory routes of animals, or sacred geography? And if so, how were these patterns conceived, measured, and maintained over generations, without formalized tools or written records? The subject matter itself conveys layers of meaning. Scenes of hunters with bows and arrows, wild goats leaping across cliffs, or boats navigating waterways suggest practical knowledge, yet the sheer quantity and stylistic consistency hint at deeper symbolic or ritual significance. Some petroglyphs depict human figures with exaggerated features or in poses that seem ceremonial, their gestures pointing to unseen principles or guiding communal memory. Could these carvings have functioned as teaching tools, ritual guides, or celestial maps encoded in stone? The possibility that utility and spirituality were intertwined adds a dimension of complexity rarely acknowledged in simple descriptions of rock art. The technique of creation is equally remarkable. Carvers chipped, incised, or abraded the stone to produce images with precision, depth, and durability. Given the hardness of the rock and the absence of metal tools in much of the chronology, the effort required is extraordinary. How were these techniques perfected, shared, and preserved over thousands of years? How did communities ensure the continuity of symbolic language and iconography across generations, in a landscape both harsh and remote? And perhaps most importantly, how much knowledge, astronomical, social, spiritual, was encoded in ways that are now nearly invisible to modern eyes? Speculative interpretations extend the mystery further. Some researchers suggest that the carvings served as a complex symbolic or cosmological system, with certain motifs representing celestial bodies, seasonal markers, or ritual instructions. Others propose that Gobustan was not merely an artistic space, but a living archive of communal knowledge, guiding social behavior, spiritual practice, and environmental understanding. Could the repetition of particular animals or symbols indicate encoded memory about migratory patterns, celestial observation, or ancestral lineage? The possibility that these images constitute a multidimensional map, blending practical, spiritual, and educational functions, is both compelling and difficult to verify. The landscape itself amplifies the enigma. Gobustan sits at the intersection of valleys, cliffs, and waterways, its rocky surfaces eroded yet enduring, providing both visibility and prominence. The placement of carvings on elevated slabs or along ridge lines suggests deliberate selection, enhancing their visibility for observers or participants in ritual. How did ancient people conceptualize this spatial relationship between art, environment, and human perception? Were lines of sight, horizon points, and sun angles considered in ways that modern analysis can only partially reconstruct? Artifacts associated with Gobustan, including stone tools, hearths, and settlement remains, offer glimpses of daily life, but they cannot fully explain the persistence, purpose, or precision of the rock carvings. Some petroglyphs are isolated, others clustered, yet their continuity across time points to a cultural significance that transcended individual generations. How did these communities integrate art, ritual, and observation into a coherent practice that spanned thousands of years? How much knowledge, technical, spiritual, or environmental, has been lost to erosion, fading, and the passage of time? Standing among the carvings today, one senses both intimacy and distance. Fingers trace the shallow grooves, and eyes follow lines that extend across slabs, imagining the hunters, dancers, and voyagers who once inhabited this space. The carvings communicate human presence, observation, and intention, yet their full meaning, how, why, and for whom they were created, remains tantalizingly out of reach. The mystery of Gobustan lies not merely in the images themselves, but in the vast, unrecorded knowledge and experience embedded in every line and form. What makes Gobustan rock art so enduring and impossible to replicate is the integration of artistry, observation, ritual, and environmental understanding into a coherent and long-lived system of human expression. How did these communities conceive complex compositions, spatial alignments, and symbolic language without written records or formal measurement tools? How was knowledge transmitted across millennia, surviving in stone but intangible to modern eyes? And most provocatively, what other secrets, encoded in lines, animal figures, and celestial alignments, remain hidden on these ancient rocks, whispering of lives, beliefs, and understanding that we are only beginning to glimpse? As the sun dips behind the rocky ridges of Gobustan, casting long shadows across the etched animals and human figures, our exploration moves southward across arid plains and rugged limestone hills to the vast deserts of northern Saudi Arabia. Here, hidden beneath the sands and shallow hills, lie structures of profound mystery, the Al-Qutm underground tombs. Unlike the open galleries of Gobustan, Al-Qutm is a secretive realm, buried beneath layers of earth, its chambers and corridors preserved in silence, waiting to reveal the knowledge, labor, and belief systems of civilizations long vanished. From a distance, the tombs are nearly invisible, marked only by subtle mounds or depressions in the desert terrain. Approaching these enigmatic sites, the first impression is of concealment and deliberate seclusion, a landscape shaped as much by human intention as by natural erosion. Descending into the tombs is a transformative experience. The temperature drops, the light dims, and the air grows heavy with stillness. The underground chambers, hewn from solid limestone, convey an immediate sense of care, precision, and purpose. The tombs themselves vary in scale and complexity. Some are modest, single-chambered spaces, barely large enough to house a few bodies or offerings, while others are extensive networks of rooms connected by narrow corridors, vaulted ceilings, and carefully aligned passageways. The walls are smoothed, floors leveled, and ceilings corbelled or gently arched to distribute weight, showcasing a sophisticated understanding of subterranean construction. How did these builders achieve such structural integrity without iron tools or formalized engineering principles? And what motivated communities to invest such labor into spaces that would remain unseen by most? Dating the tombs has proven challenging. Radiocarbon samples and associated artifacts suggest a broad chronology spanning the early to mid-1st millennium BCE, possibly earlier, but precise timelines remain elusive. Artifacts within the tombs, ceramic fragments, stone tools, metal ornaments, and personal items indicate ritualized burials and sustained human use. Yet, the elaborate architecture and considerable effort devoted to construction seem disproportionate to the sparse material remains, raising fundamental questions. Were these spaces purely funerary, or did they serve broader ceremonial or symbolic functions that have left no trace beyond stone? The design and layout of Al-Qutm are deliberate, almost architectural in intention. Chambers are often rectangular or slightly tapered, with central burial areas surrounded by narrow corridors or annexes. Some walls feature niches, depressions, or small enclosures that might have held offerings, ritual implements, or markers of status. The tunnels connecting rooms often follow intricate patterns, suggesting that movement within the tombs may have been as meaningful as the objects or bodies placed inside. Could the act of walking through these chambers have constituted a ritual or journey in itself? Even environmental considerations appear to have been accounted for. Ventilation shafts and subtle drainage channels hint at an understanding of airflow, humidity control, and subterranean preservation. In some cases, corridors align to allow shafts of light to penetrate into central chambers at specific times of day or year, suggesting awareness of solar patterns and perhaps ritual timing. Could these tombs, then, have been both practical and symbolic, functioning as ceremonial spaces, observatories, and repositories of sacred knowledge simultaneously? The labor required to construct Al-Qutm is staggering. Transporting large limestone blocks, carving chambers by hand, and ensuring structural stability in soft and shifting soil would have demanded coordinated effort, knowledge of material properties, and careful planning. How were such skills transmitted in societies without formal writing systems? How did these communities organize labor, maintain precision, and preserve knowledge over multiple generations to produce such enduring subterranean architecture? Artifacts recovered within the tombs add to the intrigue. Stone tools suggest daily life and craft, while jewelry, amulets, and occasional metal fragments hint at wealth, status, or ritual practice. Some items appear deliberately placed in patterns or clusters, while others occupy central niches, suggesting intentional encoding of meaning. Could these placements reflect spiritual principles, social hierarchy, or encoded cosmological knowledge? Were the tombs intended to guide the deceased on a journey beyond death, or were they designed to instruct the living, preserving memory and societal structure? The tomb's subterranean nature introduces further mystery. Concealed from view, insulated from weather, and difficult to access, these chambers imply secrecy and reverence. Why invest in construction that obscures its form from the wider community? Was the underground setting chosen purely for protection, or did it hold symbolic significance, representing transition, rebirth, or passage to another realm? How did these builders conceptualize three-dimensional space, circulation, and visibility underground, without the benefit of modern surveying tools or architectural training? Speculative theories deepen the enigma. Some researchers propose that Al-Qutm was more than a necropolis. It may have been a locus of initiation, spiritual instruction, or sacred observance. Certain corridors and chambers may have guided ritual movement, aligning with celestial or topographical markers in ways that encoded knowledge of the natural world. Could the tombs have been designed as subterranean mnemonic devices, preserving practical and cosmological knowledge in their architecture itself? And if so, what principles, astronomical, ritual, or social, remain hidden, waiting silently beneath layers of sand and stone? The spatial organization of the tombs suggests an extraordinary degree of planning and social cohesion. Complexes are often arranged in clusters, with corridors linking chambers in intricate sequences. Such arrangements may reflect social hierarchies, ritual sequencing, or symbolic cosmologies. Yet, without written records, these interpretations remain tentative. Could the labyrinthine layout have functioned as a physical narrative, guiding participants through stages of understanding, memory, or spiritual progression? And if so, what knowledge has been lost to time, leaving only the stones as witnesses? Walking through Al-Qutum today, the tombs evoke a palpable sense of timelessness. Every carved wall, vaulted ceiling, and carefully positioned niche carries evidence of human ingenuity, planning, and cultural intent. Light filtering through narrow shafts reveals the contours of chambers, casting shadows that accentuate their precision and symmetry. The cool air, the echo of footsteps, and the silence of millennia combine to create a space that is both intimate and monumental. One cannot help but imagine the ceremonies, the preparation of the dead, and the careful attention that went into each stone, each corridor, and each chamber. What makes the Al-Qutum underground tombs so extraordinary and so impossible to replicate is not merely their subterranean engineering, but the convergence of multiple human skills and knowledge systems: architectural design, labor organization, ritual practice, and an understanding of environment and materials. How did these early builders conceive of underground architecture on such a scale, maintain precision across generations, and integrate symbolic or ceremonial meaning into every aspect of design? How much of their knowledge, astronomical, ritual, or societal, was encoded in the corridors, chambers, and niches, now buried beneath centuries of sand and silence? And most hauntingly, as we leave the tombs and the desert sun begins to illuminate the dunes above, we are reminded of the limits of our understanding. Beneath our feet lies evidence of human intelligence, ingenuity, and devotion that cannot be fully measured or replicated. What secrets still slumber in the cool darkness of Al-Qutum, waiting for eyes capable of reading the language of stone? What principles, practices, and beliefs, encoded in space, alignment, and architecture, have been preserved only in the silent testimony of the tombs themselves? In their shadows, the mystery endures, inviting curiosity, reflection, and wonder that stretch across the millennia. As the shifting sands and hidden chambers of Al-Qutum fade behind us, we move far across continents and oceans, descending now into the lush river valleys of the Andes. Here, in the highlands of Peru, nestled beside the flowing waters of the Huallaga River, lies a site whose silence and structure evoke reverence across millennia: the Kotosh religious temple. Unlike the subterranean secrecy of Al-Qutum, Kotosh rises modestly from the earth, its earthen mounds concealing carefully constructed stone chambers and ritual spaces that have endured for nearly 5,000 years. At first glance, the site seems simple, a mound of earth and rock, but closer examination reveals layers of human intention, ceremonial planning, and architectural sophistication that defy easy explanation. The temple sits within a serene Andean valley, surrounded by terraced hills and intersected by tributaries of the Marañón River. The landscape, both fertile and formidable, sets the stage for contemplation, a world where natural resources, topography, and spiritual imagination converge. Approaching Kotosh, one is struck by the subtlety of its form. The earthen mound conceals stone foundations, narrow passageways, and small vaulted chambers, all carefully aligned along axes that suggest deliberate spatial reasoning. Despite its humble appearance, the temple's construction conveys a profound understanding of architecture, labor management, and symbolic design. Excavations reveal a complex of structures built over successive phases, each layer representing a period of refinement and cultural continuity. Archaeologists identify the site as belonging to the pre-ceramic period, roughly 3000 to 1800 BCE, making Kotosh one of the earliest known centers of ritual in the Andes. The most famous feature, often referred to as the Temple of the Crossed Hands, contains intricately carved motifs, two crossed hands embedded in the walls, that may symbolize union, ritual offering, or cosmological concepts. What meaning did these symbols convey to the ancient builders, and why were they preserved with such care? The answers remain tantalizingly out of reach. The architectural design of Kotosh is deceptively simple, yet remarkably sophisticated. Stone walls are carefully fitted, chambers are precisely aligned, and floors are smoothed to create both functional and ceremonial spaces. The presence of multiple phases of construction indicates not only sustained cultural engagement, but also transmission of architectural knowledge across generations. How did these early societies, lacking written language or formal engineering tools, maintain such precision? How did they convey both practical construction techniques and symbolic understanding to successive builders over centuries? The temple's design also reveals an intimate understanding of environment and materials. Local stones were quarried and shaped to form sturdy foundations, while earthen fills provided stability and insulation. Ventilation and drainage were considered, allowing chambers to remain dry and structurally sound over millennia. Could the builders have intentionally harnessed natural light or airflow for ritual purposes, creating a play of shadow and illumination within the chambers at particular times of day or year? If so, Kotosh represents a remarkable synthesis of observation, architectural skill, and spiritual intent integrated seamlessly into its landscape. Inside the chambers, ceremonial spaces invite speculation. The Temple of the Crossed Hands features a small, intimate room where offerings may have been placed, ritual acts performed, or communal gatherings held. Pottery shards, stone implements, and traces of fire suggest repeated human activity, yet the spaces themselves remain enigmatic. Why were some chambers deliberately small and enclosed, while others are broader and more open? Was this difference functional, symbolic, or both? Could the architectural variation correspond to stages of ritual, social hierarchy, or cosmological principles? Mainstream interpretations emphasize the temple's role as a religious and ceremonial center, but the precision of construction, layering of successive phases, and symbolic motifs hint at deeper knowledge encoded in stone, spatial arrangement, and ritual practice. How were these sacred principles preserved over centuries without writing? How did builders align their work with environmental cues, astronomical events, or spiritual concepts they sought to enshrine? And what, if any, esoteric knowledge may have been passed through performance, gesture, or communal memory rather than through written record? The cultural and symbolic complexity of Kotosh extends beyond architecture. The crossed hands motif, repeated in different layers, suggests a continuity of belief and symbolic language that bridges generations. Some researchers propose that these hands represented communal unity, cosmological balance, or mediation between human and divine realms. Could the temple itself have functioned as a teaching tool, a space where initiates learned rituals, observed natural cycles, or participated in ceremonies that encoded moral, spiritual, or astronomical knowledge? And if so, what aspects of this understanding have been lost to time, leaving only stone and earth as testimony? Construction techniques at Kotosh are also remarkable for their labor intensity and ingenuity. Stones were carefully selected, shaped, and positioned to create durable structures capable of withstanding seismic activity and erosion. Successive layers of construction indicate planning, social organization, and intergenerational cooperation. How did early Andean societies organize and mobilize labor for such projects? What social or spiritual motivations compelled communities to invest immense effort in spaces whose function was largely ceremonial rather than utilitarian? Speculative interpretations invite us to consider possibilities beyond the conventional. Some suggest Kotosh may have served as a proto-observatory, where celestial events were tracked and integrated into ritual calendars. Others posit that the spatial arrangement of chambers encoded a cosmological or mnemonic system, guiding both ritual and social memory. Could the temple have functioned simultaneously as a site of burial, ceremony, teaching, and observation? If so, the integration of knowledge, belief, and practical skill would be extraordinary for its era, highlighting capabilities that are difficult to fully comprehend or replicate today. The temple's integration with the landscape enhances its mystery. Situated on a river terrace, the mound commands views of surrounding valleys and hills, blending natural topography with human design. The environment itself may have been part of the ritual experience, framing the temple within a broader sacred geography. How did ancient builders perceive and utilize this interplay between structure and landscape? Was the positioning deliberate for practical observation, ritual visibility, or spiritual resonance? And how much of the symbolic logic embedded in site placement remains obscured by millennia? Visiting Kotosh today evokes a profound sense of continuity and enigma. The chambers are quiet, the stone walls cool to the touch, and sunlight filtering through gaps illuminates floors worn smooth by human footsteps over thousands of years. One can almost imagine ritual participants moving deliberately through spaces, performing gestures, chanting, or offering objects to unseen forces. Every layer of earth, every carefully positioned stone, bears witness to centuries of intention, planning, and spiritual engagement. What makes the Kotosh religious temple so compelling and impossible to replicate is the extraordinary combination of architecture, ritual practice, intergenerational knowledge, and environmental integration. How did these ancient builders conceive a structure that harmonized earth, stone, and human activity in such a precise and enduring manner? How did knowledge of construction, symbolism, and ritual survive across centuries without written records? And most provocatively, what other secrets remain embedded in the walls, floors, and orientation of Kotosh? Hidden knowledge about human cognition, cosmology, and sacred practice that may never be fully understood, but continues to echo across the Andean Valley, inviting reflection, wonder, and awe. In Kotosh, we encounter a civilization that reached far beyond simple survival, crafting a sacred space where labor, belief, and observation intersect. The temple is both a monument and a mystery, a tangible trace of human ingenuity that challenges our assumptions about what early societies were capable of achieving. As we stand in its shadow, the questions linger. How much did they know? How much did they intend? And how much of their knowledge remains encoded in stone, waiting for eyes capable of reading it once again?